My family shut me out of our reunion until my niece whispered, "You need to see what they put in the folder I found out." I had been excluded from my own family reunion because my cousin Ashley posted a blurry photo of Aunt Carol's backyard with the caption, "Finally got everybody together again." There were folding tables under white tents, a red cooler by the fence, my mother Linda smiling with a paper plate in her hand, and my sister Dana standing next to the grill like she owned the whole day. Even my brother Eric was there with his wife and kids, and Eric never drove in from Ohio unless there was a reason. I stared at that picture until my phone screen went dark. 3 days earlier, my mother had told me there was no reunion this summer because everyone was too busy and money was tight. She said maybe we would all try again around Thanksgiving. I had believed her because I wanted to believe her. I had spent most of my life believing my family whenever the lie sounded just polite enough. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my 16-year-old niece Sophie. "Please do not tell Mom I texted you." A second bubble popped up before I could answer. "You need to come here." Then a third one, and act normal. Please. I called her right away, but she declined it. A minute later, she sent one more message. "I cannot talk. They made a folder about you." My stomach dropped so hard it felt like missing a stair in the dark. There are moments when your body understands danger before your mind does. I was already grabbing my keys before I had even decided I was going. I drove the whole 40 minutes to Aunt Carol's house with my chest tight and my thoughts racing from one bad possibility to another. Maybe it was just another round of family gossip. Maybe Dana had printed screenshots of my texts and was doing what she always did, which was start a fire and then stand back so everyone would blame the smoke on me. Maybe I was overreacting, but I knew I was not, because my family only got organized when there was something to gain. I am 34 now, and I should probably explain that nothing in my family was ever simple unless it was simple for Dana. Dana is 2 years younger than me, beautiful in the polished, effortless way some people are, and she has been the golden child since we were little. If Dana forgot a birthday, she was overwhelmed. If I forgot one, I was selfish. If Dana borrowed money, she needed support. If I asked for money back, I was cold. My mother had a different tone for Dana than she ever had for me. Softer, proud, protective. Like Dana was a candle flame and I was a smoke alarm. By the time we were adults, everybody had settled into their roles so deeply that no one even pretended anymore. My father Harold stayed quiet. My mother explained Dana. My brother Eric stayed out of it unless there was an inheritance, a property issue, or a family vote on something he suddenly cared about. Aunt Carol played peacemaker as long as peace meant I swallowed the insult. Uncle Robert laughed things off. Cousin Ashley watched everything and told me later she always knew something was wrong, but she never stepped in when it mattered. And me. I was the dependable one. The one who drove people to appointments, the one who took off work when Grandma June fell, the one who answered the late night calls, the one who heard, "I know this is a lot, but you are so much better at this than Dana is." That sentence ruined years of my life. 5 years ago, Grandma June had a stroke. It did not take her mind, thank God, but it weakened her left side and shook her confidence so badly that she would cry if the phone rang twice in a row. She had always been the center of our family. Every reunion, every birthday, every Sunday dinner somehow folded around her. She was sharp, funny, stubborn, and old in the way that made people underestimate her while she quietly remembered every promise they broke. After the stroke, everybody said the right things. Dana said she would take Tuesdays and Thursdays. Eric said he would send money every month. My mother said she would stay overnight whenever I needed a break. Aunt Carol said we all had to pull together. Then life got in the way for everybody except me. Dana's kids had activities. Eric's job was demanding. My mother said her arthritis was acting up. Aunt Carol had church commitments. Uncle Robert had back pain. Somehow all their reasons stacked neatly onto my shoulders. I moved back to my hometown and rented a small duplex 10 minutes from Grandma's house because she was terrified of going into assisted living. I was working remote by then for a medical billing company, and I told myself it would just be temporary. I drove her to therapy, managed her prescriptions, helped her bathe, made sure she ate, argued with insurance companies, and learned how to sleep lightly enough to hear my phone ring in the middle of the night. When you become the caretaker in a family like mine, everybody starts talking about you like you are both a saint and an employee. They praise you in public and resent you in private. They say no one appreciates what you do, and then they question every decision you make. That started the first time Grandma June added my name as durable power of attorney. She did it in attorney Thomas Whitaker's office. I remember because she wore a lavender cardigan and asked Thomas 3 separate times if signing those papers meant I could put her in a bad nursing home against her will. Thomas told her no. He explained everything slowly and clearly. He asked her if anyone was pressuring her. She looked right at me and said, "Honey, if anybody in this family ever pressured me, it would not be Megan. It would be the ones who only show up when silverware starts getting counted." Thomas laughed a little, then realized she was serious. I did not even want power of attorney. I wanted help. But help was never the thing people offered when paperwork was involved. They wanted authority without responsibility. Grandma knew that. The first person to get angry was Dana. She found out because Grandma mentioned it over dinner one night, and Dana put her fork down so hard it clinked against the plate. She smiled while she asked questions, which is how she always hides her worst moods. "That seems like a lot to put on Megan," she said. Grandma kept eating. "Megan is already doing the work. I just think legal control should be discussed as a family." Grandma dabbed her mouth and looked at her over the rim of her glasses. "If I wanted to discuss my own choices as a family, I would have." Dana laughed like it was a joke, but later that night she cornered me in the kitchen and said I had manipulated an old woman. I still remember exactly what she said because I had been up since 5 that morning and was too tired to defend myself properly. "You always do this," she whispered. "You make yourself indispensable and then act like everybody else failed you." I said, "You did fail me." She stared at me a second, then smiled in that flat way she has when she thinks she has found your weak spot. "See? There it is, Martyr Megan." That became the theme of the next 3 years. If I asked Eric where the money was that he promised, I was keeping score. If I asked Mom to sit with Grandma for one Saturday so I could take a nap in my own bed, I was being dramatic. If I told Dana not to give Grandma herbal supplements she found online because they conflicted with her blood thinners, I was controlling. Meanwhile, Grandma saw everything. She saw Dana show up for photos and leave before cleanup. She saw Mom post long messages on Facebook about family devotion after canceling half the visits she promised. She saw Eric brag about taking care of family when his help came as a birthday card with $20 inside 6 weeks late. And she saw me folding laundry at her kitchen table with my laptop open while I cried quietly because the pharmacy had messed up again and I was too tired to call them back. One night, about a year before she died, Grandma June told me something I have never forgotten. She said, "The people who benefit from your silence will always call your voice a problem." At the time, I just nodded. I understand it now better than I ever wanted to. Grandma died 18 months ago. She died in her own bed with me holding one hand and hospice nurse Kelly holding the other. She had a soft blanket over her legs and a baseball game humming on low volume because she said silence made death feel rude. The last thing she said clearly was, "Do not let them turn this into business before they turn it into grief." I promised her I would not. That promise lasted exactly 6 days. On the 7th day, Dana asked about the lake house. It was not some fancy vacation property. It was a weathered 2-bedroom place near Lake Harmon that had been in the family since before I was born. We had reunions there for years before Aunt Carol started hosting bigger ones in town. Grandma loved that place because Grandpa built the porch swing himself. Everybody suddenly loved it too after she died. Grandma's will was straightforward. Thomas handled it. There were some savings, some jewelry, the house she lived in, and the lake house which she left to be sold with the proceeds split according to a written formula she had updated after the stroke. She left specific pieces of jewelry to specific people. She left me her cedar chest, her recipe box, and a larger share than Dana or Eric because, in Thomas's careful words, Grandma wanted my years of unpaid caregiving to be recognized. She also wrote a separate letter explaining that she made those decisions freely, without pressure, and with full understanding. I did not ask for any of that, but Dana acted like I had staged a robbery. At the reading, she cried before Thomas even finished. Eric muttered that Grandma must have been confused. My mother said she was just surprised. Then Dana started asking questions about reimbursements. Grandma had reimbursed me from her account for groceries, mileage, medical supplies, and the home health aide I hired on the 2 weekends a month I could no longer physically keep up by myself. Every receipt had been documented. Every transfer was noted. Thomas had copies of everything because Grandma insisted on it. Dana still told people I had been on Grandma's mama roll, which was such a cruel and ridiculous thing to say that even now I get angry thinking about it. After the estate was mostly settled, I tried stepping back from all of them. I answered polite messages politely. I skipped 2 birthday dinners and 1 barbecue. I stopped volunteering for everything. I started therapy. I learned that I had a habit of apologizing before I even disagreed with somebody. I was getting better at being away from them. Then came the reunion. I parked half a block from Aunt Carol's house because I did not want anyone seeing my car right away. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, looking at the white tents over the fence and hearing the muffled bounce of music. My hands were shaking. Part of me wanted to leave, which should tell you exactly how much history I have with these people. But Sophie had texted me. Sophie never created drama. If anything, she had been raised so deep inside Dana's moods that she apologized when other people bumped into her. I got out and walked around the side of the house instead of going straight to the front. Sophie was waiting by the gate near the garbage bins. She was wearing jean shorts and a blue t-shirt, and she looked so frightened that for one awful second, I thought something had happened to her. The second she saw me, she opened the gate just enough to pull me inside. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "What happened?" She grabbed my wrist. Her hand was ice cold. "You need to see what they put in the folder." I will never forget the way she said it. Not dramatic, not excited, just scared. She led me through the laundry room and into the hallway by Aunt Carol's office. Everyone else was in the backyard. I could hear my mother laughing. I could hear Uncle Robert arguing about whether the burgers were done. It was so normal out there that it made the quiet hallway feel unreal. On the desk in Aunt Carol's office was a thick manila folder with my name written on the tab in my mother's handwriting. Megan, all caps. Sophie pointed at it but did not touch it. "Mom, Grandma Linda, and Uncle Eric were going through it this morning," she said. "They said when Mr. Whitaker gets here, they are going to finally deal with you." I looked at her. "Thomas Whitaker is coming here." She nodded. "Mom said he thinks it is just a family paperwork thing." My pulse started pounding in my ears. I opened the folder. The first page was titled Concerns Regarding Megan Miller's Conduct During June Miller's Care and Estate Administration. I actually laughed when I saw it, but it came out as a choking sound. Under the title was a bulleted list: Isolation of June Miller from family members, undue influence over medical and financial decisions, improper reimbursements, emotional manipulation, possible concealment of assets. There were screenshots of text messages, except they were cropped to remove context. One showed me telling Dana, "No, you cannot take that ring right now." Left out was the line before it where Dana had asked to borrow Grandma's diamond ring for a gala while Grandma was in the hospital. Another showed me texting Mom, "I need you to stop promising visits you cancel." Left out was the 10 cancellations before it. There were bank statements with yellow highlights around reimbursed gas and grocery charges, but none of the attached receipt logs. There were printed photos of Grandma looking tired in a wheelchair, as if old age itself were evidence against me. There was even a typed statement claiming multiple family members had noticed Grandma seemed anxious around me. Then I saw the part that turned my hands numb. Clipped to the back was a draft agreement. If signed, I would agree to waive any remaining claims related to Grandma's estate, consent to a private family review of the caregiving period, and refrain from making public statements that could harm family relationships. There was also a line about returning any sentimental property that the family believed had been distributed unfairly. The line for my signature was blank. Under it was my mother's name. Under that, Dana's. Under that, Eric's. And beneath those was a note in blue pen. "If she refuses, proceed with letter campaign." I looked at Sophie so fast she flinched. "Who wrote that?" "I do not know," she whispered. "I think Grandma Linda, maybe Mom." They were talking over each other. There was more. Behind the agreement was a separate packet labeled Witness Notes. Sophie's name was printed on one page. My nephew, Caleb's name was printed on another. There were typed prompts under each. Did Megan ever raise her voice around June? Did June ever express fear? Did Megan limit who could visit? I felt sick. They wanted you and Caleb to say this stuff. Sophie's face crumpled. Mom told me to just tell the truth, but then she kept telling me what the truth was supposed to be. Caleb is outside with a football. He does not know what any of this means. I heard Mom say, "If you sign the paper, then we can stop the legal mess before it gets ugly." I took a breath that did not go all the way into my lungs. "Sophie, did anyone else see you bring me in here?" She shook her head. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of every page. My hands steadied as I worked. That is the thing about being pushed too far by the same people for too long. Eventually, panic burns off and leaves something colder. I photographed the folder front and back. I photographed every page, every highlight, every handwritten note. Then I texted the whole set to myself, to my best friend Jasmine, and to the email account I use for important records. Jasmine is a paralegal and the kind of friend who never says calm down when you have a reason not to. She called me before I had even finished. I stepped into the hall and answered in a whisper. Tell me you are not alone, she said. Sophie is here. Good. Do not sign anything. Do not let them isolate you. If that attorney really is coming and he handled the estate, he is going to know this is nonsense the second he sees actual documentation. Do you still have your caregiving binder? Of course I still had it. People think documentation is about trust. It is not. Documentation is what you build when you know trust will fail. I kept 3 binders after Grandma died. One had medical records and appointment summaries. One had financial logs and reimbursements. One had printed texts, calendars, and visit schedules, because after Dana first accused me of keeping Grandma from people, I started tracking every visit offered, canceled, or missed. It felt insane when I started doing it. It felt life-saving now. It is in my trunk, I said. Get it. And Megan, if your state is one-party consent, record the conversation. If not, do not. But stay in witnesses, not whispers. That was exactly what I needed to hear. When I went back into the office, Sophie was standing in the same spot, arms wrapped around herself. I asked her one question. Why did you text me? She looked at the floor. Because you took care of me too. That nearly broke me. A few years earlier, when Dana was going through one of her messier divorces from within her marriage phases with her husband Scott, Sophie spent so much time at Grandma's house that I practically helped raise her for a while. I drove her to debate club. I helped with algebra. I sat outside urgent care with her when she needed stitches after a bike accident and Dana was not picking up. I knew she loved her mother, but I also knew she knew exactly what her mother was. I squeezed her hand and told her she had done the right thing. Then I went out through the side door, walked to my car, opened the trunk, and pulled out the dark blue binder I had almost left at home when I cleaned out my back seat last month. If I had not been such a pack rat, that day might have gone very differently. When I came back around front, Aunt Carol saw me first. Her face drained of color like she had seen a ghost. Megan, she said, too bright. We did not know you were coming. I looked right at her and said, clearly. The yard went quiet in waves. My mother turned around with the paper plate still in her hand. Dana froze by the grill. Eric straightened up from his lawn chair. Even Scott, who normally spent family gatherings pretending to be invisible, looked like he wanted to sink into the patio. No one rushed to hug me. That told me everything. My mother recovered first. She always did. Sweetheart, she said, using the voice she keeps for public performances. Ashley must have posted before we had a chance to explain. This was very last minute. Really, I said. Last minute enough for tents, catering trays, matching reunion cups, and a folder with my name on it in Aunt Carol's office. You could have heard a pin drop. Dana set down the tongs. Sophie, she snapped without even looking at her daughter. Did you bring her in here? I stepped between them before Sophie had to answer. Do not do that, I said. Do not make this about her. Mom's face changed first, the polite mask slipping just enough to show annoyance. Megan, you are making a scene. I laughed. I was not invited to my own family reunion, but I am making the scene. Dana folded her arms. Nobody said you were not invited. Then why did Mom tell me it was canceled? Because we knew you would turn it into exactly this. There it was. The family version of truth. Hurt them by noticing what they did. And suddenly your reaction becomes the crime. I lifted the blue binder in my hand. Since everybody is here, I said, echoing the phrase Sophie told me they had been using. Let's do this out loud. My mother glanced toward the house. So did Eric. They were waiting on Thomas. That almost made me smile. Aunt Carol tried one last time to shrink the whole thing. Maybe we should just sit down privately. No, I said. Private is how you all made the folder. Public can work for the rest. By then the cousins had drifted closer. Ashley looked confused but interested. Uncle Robert looked irritated in the way men do when family drama interrupts lunch. Caleb was chasing a football along the fence line and had no idea his name was inside a witness packet. Sophie stood near the patio door, pale and silent. Dana walked straight toward me. If you went through that folder, you invaded private material. A folder with my name on it containing accusations about me, witness coaching notes for your children, and a plan to pressure me into signing a waiver. That is not what it was. Then tell everyone what it was. She opened her mouth, but a car door slammed in the driveway. Thomas Whitaker walked through the gate, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a short-sleeved button-down like this was any other August afternoon. He smiled at Aunt Carol, then saw me standing there and slowed down. Megan, he said, I did not know you would be here. I did not know I was supposed to be either, I said. He looked from me to my mother to Dana and back again. He is in his 60s, silver-haired, meticulous, and not hard to read if you watch his eyebrows. One went up. Mom hurried over to him. Thomas, thank you for coming. We just wanted to discuss a few unresolved concerns as a family. I said, before you discuss anything, you should probably look at what they prepared in your name. I handed him my phone with the photograph pages pulled up. He read the first page and his whole expression changed. The friendly social look disappeared. In its place came the attorney face I remembered from Grandma's will reading. "Who drafted this?" he asked. Nobody answered. He looked at Mom, Linda. Mom gave a thin smile. We all contributed. Thomas kept scrolling. His jaw tightened at the draft agreement. Then he reached the witness notes and looked up sharply. Children were asked to participate in this. Dana cut in, asked to tell the truth. Sophie spoke before anyone else could. That is not true. Everybody turned to look at her. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. Mom told me Aunt Megan kept people away from Great-Grandma June, but I was there all the time and she did not. Aunt Megan asked for help a lot. People just did not come. Dana's face went white and then red. Sophie, enough. But Sophie had crossed that line kids cross only once, the line where fear finally loses to disgust. You told me if Aunt Megan signed the paper, then the family could be normal again, she said. You said she got too much money, and Grandma Linda said maybe this was the only way to make things fair. My mother snapped. That is not what I said. Sophie looked right at her. It is exactly what you said. In the kitchen. No one moved. Thomas handed my phone back and said, very carefully, I was told this was a casual conversation regarding distribution misunderstandings and memorial property questions. If this packet was prepared to pressure Megan into waiving rights or admitting wrongdoing, that is a serious problem. Dana laughed once, short and bitter. Oh, please. Nobody is forcing her to do anything. We wanted accountability. I set my binder on the table hard enough to make the cups jump. Great, I said. Let's do accountability. I opened the binder. The first section was the calendar log. These are all the dates from the 2 years after Grandma's stroke. Green is a visit completed. Yellow is promised and canceled. Red is no response. Dana, you promised 104 weekday visits. You completed 9. Mom, you promised 72 overnights. You completed 11. Eric, you said you were sending monthly support. Here are the deposits. There were 4, Eric muttered. I had expenses. So did I said. I turned pages. This section is receipts and reimbursements. Every gas reimbursement corresponds to a medical appointment or pharmacy run. Every grocery reimbursement matches Grandmama's approved budget. Here are the logs Thomas reviewed. Here are the copies of the bank notes. Here are the home aid invoices. Here are the mileage totals. Here are Grandma's signatures on the months. She still preferred signing things herself. Thomas nodded once. He had seen most of it before. Dana crossed her arms tighter. That does not prove you were not manipulating her. I flipped to the visit schedule log. Actually, this helps. Here are the dates you claim Grandma was isolated from family. On 3 of them, you canceled the same day. On 2, Mom canceled because of brunch plans. On 1, Eric did not show and never called. And on the date you say Grandma seemed afraid of me, hospice nurse Kelly documented that Dana had just asked Grandma where the lake house deed was. Scott actually looked up at that. Dana's head snapped toward me. You do not get to bring up one conversation and act like it was theft. You were standing in her bedroom asking where her documents were while she was on oxygen. I was asking where things were kept because you thought she was dying that night. Mom stepped forward. Megan, stop. I looked at her. No. I spent years stopping so all of you could stay comfortable. I am done. I pulled out a clear plastic sleeve from the back of the binder. Inside were screenshots and a printed email. This, I said, is from 6 months before Grandma died. Dana charged $1,200 to Grandma's emergency credit card for a sofa deposit after saying she used the card by mistake. Grandma was too embarrassed to confront her, so I made a payment plan spreadsheet, and Dana paid back $400 total. Here is the email chain. Here are the repayments. Here is the missing balance. The yard went dead still. Scott turned slowly toward his wife. Dana. It was a mistake, she said quickly, and it was between me and Grandma. It became my problem when you called me a thief over grocery receipts, I said. Eric stood up then, finally deciding neutrality was too uncomfortable. This is ridiculous, he said. Everybody here knows Grandma played favorites at the end. Megan got in her ear. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it was new, but because some childish piece of me always hopes the person saying the cruel thing will realize it is cruel while they are saying it. I looked at Thomas. Would you like to answer that? Or should I read Grandma's letter? My mother's eyes widened. What letter? Thomas closed his portfolio slowly. June left an explanatory letter with the estate file. I did not intend to read it aloud unless necessary because it was personal, Dana said. Then do not. I said, read it. Thomas looked at me for one long second, then opened his portfolio. I realized then that he had brought a copy, probably because he knew exactly what kind of family he was walking into, even if he did not know the details. He unfolded the page. This letter reflects June Miller's stated reasons for her final decisions. I am reading only the relevant portion. He adjusted his glasses. To my family. If there is trouble after I am gone, it will not be because anyone confused me. It will be because some of you count fairness only when the numbers do not favor you. Megan has given me labor, privacy, sleep, and years she will never get back. She did not ask for payment. She asked for help. If you are angry at what she receives, be angrier at what you did not do. Dana loves me, but Dana loves winning more. Eric loves me, but distance has made him generous with opinions instead of effort. Linda is my daughter, and I love her, but she protects comfort over truth. If anyone says Megan controlled me, know that I was in full control the whole time. I made these choices because gratitude should not have to hide from resentment. No one spoke. Thomas lowered the page. I felt like someone had reached across 18 months of grief and put a hand between my shoulder blades so I could keep standing. My mother looked devastated, but not in the way I once would have hoped. Not the devastation of understanding, the devastation of being seen. Dana recovered first, as usual. This is unbelievable, she said. So we are all just supposed to accept that Megan kept records on all of us for years, and somehow that makes her the healthy one. I said no. I kept records because you lied. That is what people do when lying becomes the family language. She pointed at the binder. That is sick. I pointed toward the house. The folder in Aunt Carol's office with coached witness statements for your kids is sick. At that, Aunt Carol finally spoke with more backbone than I had heard from her in years. Dana, did you really put Sophie's name on a statement? Dana did not answer. Aunt Carol's face hardened. In my house. Mom jumped in. Carol, please, we were trying to resolve this. By ambushing Megan at a reunion she was told was canceled. No one had a good reply to that. Caleb wandered over then with the football under one arm and looked around at all the adults like he had walked into the last 5 minutes of a movie. Sophie quickly took his hand and led him back toward the yard without a word. I loved her for that. Thomas slid the papers back into his portfolio. I want to be very clear, he said. The estate is substantially closed. There is no legal basis for revisiting distributions because some family members are unhappy with June's choices. If false accusations are circulated in writing, that creates risk for the people circulating them, not for Megan. And if minors were pressured to make statements they did not understand, that concerns me deeply. Eric scoffed. But it sounded weak. My mother looked at me then, really looked at me, and said the sentence she always uses when she knows she cannot win on facts. You could have handled this with more grace. Something in me went still. For years, that sentence would have worked. It would have sent me into apology mode. It would have made me question whether the betrayal mattered less than my tone about the betrayal. But standing there in Aunt Carol's yard with my dead grandmother's words still hanging in the air, I finally heard it for what it was. A demand for silence in nicer clothes. I said, Grace is all I gave this family for years. Look where it got me. Then I did something small that felt enormous. I took my paper plate from the table, scraped the untouched burger into the trash, and handed the plate back to my mother. I am done being the reason you all feel better about yourselves, I said. Dana laughed again, but there was no power in it now. Just anger and the panic of losing control of the story. So what now? You are cutting everybody off because of a misunderstanding. No, I said. I am cutting everybody off because you built a file to erase years of my life and tried to make children help you do it. Scott finally spoke, very quietly. Dana, did you know about the credit card balance still being unpaid? She spun toward him. Do not do this here, he said. Did you? That was not my marriage to watch crack, so I looked away. Ashley came over and touched my elbow. Her eyes were wet. I am sorry, she whispered. I really did not know. I believe she had not known about the folder. I did not know if I believed she had not known the rest. I nodded anyway. I went inside to get my purse from the office because in all of it I had left it near the desk. The manila folder was still there. For 1 second I stood over it and just stared at my name on the tab. Megan. It looked ugly in my mother's handwriting. I should have left it there, but I did not. I took it. Not out of revenge. Out of proof. When I came back into the hall, Sophie was waiting for me again. She looked like she expected me to disappear without saying goodbye. I set down my purse, hugged her, and felt her start crying against my shoulder. You did the brave thing, I told her. Mom is going to be so mad. Maybe. But you still did the brave thing. She pulled back and wiped her face. Are you mad at me for not telling you sooner? That question hurt almost as much as anything else that day, because only a kid raised in a house like that asks if they are guilty for not stopping adults sooner. No, I said, I am proud of you. I asked if she wanted to come stay with me that night. She glanced toward the yard, where Dana was standing rigid with her arms folded, and shook her head. Not yet. I understood. Leaving a family system is usually not one brave leap. It is a series of tiny exits. Mine started years earlier. Sophie started that afternoon. I drove home shaking so badly I had to pull into a pharmacy parking lot halfway there. Jasmine met me at my duplex 20 minutes later with takeout and a yellow legal pad. We spread everything across my kitchen table, the blue binder on one side, the manila folder on the other. Once the shock wore off, the humiliation hit. Not because any of what they wrote was true. Because they had sat together, laughing and eating and planning a family reunion around a file meant to reduce me to a problem they could manage. They did not just exclude me from a cookout. They excluded me from belonging. And if Sophie had not texted, they would have smiled to my face some other day and said they were only trying to clear the air. The next morning, I woke up to 23 messages. Mom said she was sorry things got heated and that nobody meant harm. Eric said I embarrassed the family. Dana sent a paragraph accusing me of weaponizing Grandma's death and turning Sophie against her. Aunt Carol said she had no idea the packet had gone that far and wanted to talk. Ashley said if I ever wanted to tell the real story, she would back me up. Scott sent one sentence. I did not know about the witness pages. The only message I answered was Sophie's. Thank you for believing me. I told her I always would. After that, I blocked Dana for a while. I muted my mother. I sent Thomas copies of the photographs and asked him to preserve any estate records related to Grandma's explanatory letter and my reimbursement logs in case the family tried anything else. He replied that he already intended to, and that, off the record, Grandma would have been proud of how I handled myself. That made me cry harder than the reunion did, because pride from safe people feels so different from approval from unsafe ones. Over the next few weeks, more truth leaked out the way it usually does after a failed ambush. Aunt Carol admitted Mom had asked to use her office because they wanted the folder hidden until Thomas arrived. Ashley told me she heard Dana call the reunion the perfect setting because if I made a scene, everyone would see how unstable I was. Scott asked me, through Jasmine, because I had him limited too, for copies of the credit card records. I sent them. Eric stopped messaging once he realized I was not going to argue in circles. My mother kept trying a softer tactic. She would leave voicemails saying things like, families say things they do not mean, or your grandmother would hate this division, which was rich considering Grandma had predicted this exact division in writing. Then she shifted into sadness, then into illness, then into blame. I did not take the bait. For the first time in my life, I let other people's discomfort remain theirs. About 2 months later, Sophie asked if I would meet her for coffee after school. She showed up with a backpack and eyes that looked older than 16. She told me Dana had gone through her phone, found our texts, and grounded her for betraying the family. She told me Scott and Dana were fighting constantly. She told me Caleb had started asking why Aunt Megan did not come around anymore, and nobody knew what to tell him. Then she looked at me and asked the question that made me realize how deep the damage ran. Was I supposed to protect my mom even when she was wrong? I said, no, you are a kid. Your job is not to become the wall that keeps the truth from falling on adults. She cried a little at that, quietly, like someone who had been holding a heavy thing for too long. I drove her home after and sat in my car for 10 minutes because I finally understood something my therapist had been trying to teach me. A family can make you feel guilty for healing from wounds they are still actively causing. That reunion was almost a gift, if I am honest. A cruel one, but still. It stripped away the last fantasy I had that if I explained myself carefully enough, documented enough, forgave enough, or stayed useful enough, I could earn a version of family that had never really existed. My family liked me best when I was tired, quiet, and carrying something for them. The moment I put the weight down, they called it betrayal. I still have the folder. It sits in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in my office, right next to Grandma June's recipe cards and the letter Thomas eventually let me keep. Sometimes I think about throwing it away. Then I remember the note in blue pen. If she refuses, proceed with letter campaign. That one line changed something in me forever. Because it meant the cruelty was not impulsive, it was planned. And because of that, I stopped asking myself the question children of families like mine ask too often. Was it really that bad? Yes, It was. They lied to keep me away from my own family reunion. They built a case file out of cropped messages and old resentment. They tried to trick a trusted attorney into legitimizing a sham confrontation. They put children's names on witness notes. They tried to turn my years of caregiving into suspicion because gratitude offended them more than injustice ever did. And the only reason it failed is because one teenage girl, standing in the middle of the family that raised her, decided she would rather be honest than loyal to a lie. I think about that a lot. I think about Grandma too, especially when I am in the kitchen using her recipe box. She once told me the truth does not always win quickly, but lies get tired because they need so much maintenance. I did not understand that then. I do now. These days I see Sophie often. Sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to help with college applications, sometimes because she needs a quiet house where nobody is rewriting reality in real time. Caleb comes by too when Scott brings him. He mostly wants snacks and Wi-Fi and to know whether I still have the old Monopoly set from Grandma's house. I do. As for the rest of them, distance has done what confrontation never could. It has made their voices smaller. Mom still sends holiday texts. Eric sends the occasional neutral message like nothing ever happened. Dana has tried twice to call me after fights with Sophie, probably hoping I will go back to being the family sponge. I do not answer. Aunt Carol tries harder now, and maybe one day I will decide what to do with that. Ashley and I are cordial. Thomas retired this spring and mailed me a handwritten note saying June Miller was one of his favorite clients because she always knew exactly what she meant. That sounds right. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if Sophie had stayed quiet. Maybe I would have found out about the reunion weeks later and swallowed the hurt like I always used to. Maybe Thomas would have sat through their performance and politely dismantled it, and I would still have spent months wondering whether I had somehow caused this by being too blunt, too tired, too unavailable after years of giving everything. Maybe they would have mailed the letter campaign and made me defend myself against ghosts of conversations they cropped on purpose. But that is not what happened. What happened is I walked into a backyard full of people who thought I would either stay away or stay small. What happened is my niece trusted me more than she feared them. What happened is I finally stopped confusing family with permission to harm me. I was excluded from my own family reunion, yes, but I was also handed the last proof I needed that I was never the one breaking this family. I was just the one who finally refused to lie about it. Story 2. My daughter said her children needed my retirement savings more than I did. So I asked her to meet me at the bank. I want to start by saying I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd post her family business on the internet for strangers to read. I'm 63 years old. I've worked since I was 17, raised a daughter mostly on my own, and I've spent the last 40-something years believing that if you kept your head down, paid your bills, loved your people hard, and didn't bother anyone, things would more or less work out. That's what my mother believed. That's what her mother believed. And for most of my life, that philosophy didn't fail me until about 6 weeks ago. Let me give you some background. My name is Linnea. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, in one of those complexes that used to be affordable and is now somehow considered charming because they slapped new shutters on the buildings and raised the rent $400. I've been here 11 years. I know every crack in the sidewalk, every dog by name, and exactly which apartment the man in 4B burns toast in every Tuesday morning. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. And after everything that's happened, I've started to understand how much that actually means. I worked as radiologic technologist for 31 years at a regional hospital about 40 minutes outside the city. For those who don't know what that is, I'm the person who positions you for x-rays and MRIs, the one who slides you into that loud tube and tells you to hold still while counting the seconds in my head and hoping the images come out clean so you don't have to come back. It's good work. Hard on the body after a while, though. My shoulders aren't what they used to be. My right wrist clicks when I rotate it. But it paid the bills, gave me health insurance, and let me put away a little each month into a retirement account that I treated like a religion. By the time I retired at 61, I had a little over $212,000 saved. Now, I know that might sound like a fortune to some people and like nothing to others, depending on where you live and what you're used to. But for me, a woman who raised a child alone after her husband walked out when that child was 4, it was everything. It was the result of 3 decades of saying no to things I wanted, driving cars until the wheels practically fell off, and never once taking a vacation that wasn't to someone's spare bedroom. Every dollar in that account had a story behind it, and most of those stories involved me choosing not to spend. My pension from the hospital was modest. I get about $1,900 a month after taxes, plus Social Security brings in another $1,400. Between the two, I can cover my rent, groceries, medications, and the occasional trip to the garden center for tomato plants. Nothing extravagant, nothing desperate, just a quiet, carefully balanced life that I'd spent years building toward this exact kind of peace. My daughter is named Margot. She's 36. She lives about 2 hours east of me in a town called Concord, just outside Charlotte, in a house that I will admit is lovely. 4 bedrooms, a fenced backyard, one of those kitchens with an island in the middle that always has a bowl of fake lemons on it. I've never understood the fake fruit thing, but that's beside the point. Margot married a man named Dean when she was 28. Dean works in commercial real estate, or at least that's what he tells people. From what I can gather, he basically helps investors find properties to flip or lease, and he does well enough that their house has a 3-car garage, and Margot hasn't worked a paying job since their first child was born. They have 3 kids: Braden, who's 9, Sloan, who's 6, and Jet, who just turned 4. 3 kids in 5 years. That's a lot. I know that. I raised 1 child alone, and there were days I thought I might not survive it. So I'm not going to pretend I don't understand the pressure Margot is under. But here's the thing about Margot that I need you to understand before I go any further. My daughter has always had a particular way of seeing the world. When she was young, I used to call her my little lawyer because she could argue any point from any angle and somehow make you feel like you'd been unreasonable for not seeing it her way first. It was charming when she was 7 and trying to convince me that a later bedtime was a human rights issue. It became less charming as she got older and started applying that same energy to things that actually mattered. Margot and I have always had a complicated relationship. Not bad, not estranged, but complicated in the way that a lot of mothers and daughters are complicated when the mother had to be both parents, both providers, and both disciplinarians, and the daughter grew up watching her mother carry everything without ever once complaining. Hence how absorbed the message that needing things from other people was the same as being a burden. I don't blame Margot for the way she is. I blame myself for some of it, honestly. I made her independent because I had to be, and somewhere along the line, independent tipped over into self-protective, and then self-protective tipped over into something harder. Something that looked at other people's resources and thought, not what can I offer, but what am I owed? I'm getting ahead of myself. About 2 months ago, Margot called me on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my couch with a glass of decaf tea, watching a documentary about lighthouses, which is the kind of thing you do when you're 63 and have made peace with your own dullness. The phone rang and I saw her name, and I picked up the way I always do, a little quickly, a little eager, because no matter how complicated things are between us, she's still my daughter, and I still feel that pull when I see her name on the screen. Hey, Mom. Hey, sweetie, how are the kids? The kids are fine. Braden's got a cold, but Sloane's finally sleeping through the night, so I'll take the win. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause where someone is collecting their thoughts. The kind of pause where someone has rehearsed what comes next and is waiting for the right moment to deliver it. Sure. What's going on? Another pause? Then, Dean and I have been looking at our finances, like really sitting down with them for the first time in a while, and things are tighter than we realized. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'd suspected as much. Dean's industry had been in a slump. I'd seen fewer new cars in their driveway over the last year, fewer mentions of trips, fewer restaurant photos on Margot's Instagram. I didn't keep track to be nosy. I kept track because I'm her mother. That's what mothers do. We notice the things our children stop mentioning. The kids' school just went up again. The private school. It's going up 8% next year, and we've already committed to the curriculum there because Braden needs the smaller class sizes for his attention issues. And Sloane's been seeing a speech therapist that insurance doesn't fully cover. And then Jet's starting the pre-K program in the fall, which is another 11,000 a year. Okay, I said carefully. And we sat down with our budget and we just realized that there's this gap between what's coming in and what's going out. And Dean's been trying to close more deals, but the market is the market, you know? It's not like he's not trying. I know. I'm sure he's working hard. He is. He really is. But Mom, here's the thing. She took a breath and I could hear it, that specific quality of breathing that tells you the next sentence has been practiced. Dean and I were talking, and we realized that you're in a position right now where you could really help. Not just help us, but help the kids. Your grandchildren. My stomach did something it hadn't done in years. It tightened the way it used to tighten when I'd open the mail and find a bill I couldn't pay. That old, familiar clench. What kind of help are you talking about, Margot? We were thinking, and please just hear me out before you react. We were thinking that if you took some of your retirement savings, not all of it, just a portion, and put it toward the kids' education fund, it would make a massive difference for them. Not just now, but for their whole future. Braden's going to need support through school. Sloan might need therapy for years. And Jet's barely started. How much of a portion? I asked. She said a number. She said it quickly. The way people say things they know are hard to hear. She said $60,000. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just sat there with my tea getting cold in my hands and the Lighthouse documentary flickering on the television and my daughter breathing on the other end of the line, waiting. Mom, you still there? I'm here. I know it sounds like a lot, but when you think about what it's actually doing, it's going straight to the kids. It's not like we're asking for a vacation or something fun. This is their education, their futures. And honestly, Mom, you've got your pension and your social security. You've got your apartment. You're comfortable. You're not hurting. And the kids need this more than you need it sitting in an account somewhere. There it was. The substance she'd been building toward. My grandchildren need my retirement savings more than I do. I want to tell you that I said something brave in that moment, that I drew a line, that I told her no, that I stood up for the 40 years of sacrifice that had built that account. But I didn't. What I said was, let me think about it. And she said, of course, take your time. But Mom, the school deposit is due at the end of the month. So if you could let us know by then, that would be really helpful. Then we talked about the kids for a few more minutes. Braden's cold, Sloane's new boots. Jet had learned to say actually and now inserted it into every sentence, which was apparently hilarious, normal conversation. Like she hadn't just asked me to hand over nearly a third of my life's savings and then told me there was a deadline. I hung up and I sat there for a long time. The documentary ended. The screen went dark. I sat in my living room in the dark and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. That specific bone-deep loneliness of being a mother who has given everything she has and is being told it still isn't enough. Over the next few days, I did what I always do when something heavy lands on me. I kept my routine. I got up, I walked the loop around the complex, I made my oatmeal, I went to the garden center. But underneath all of that, my mind was turning the conversation over and over like a stone in a tumbler, wearing down the rough edges until something sharper emerged. I pulled up my retirement account on my laptop. I looked at the numbers, 212,000 and change. I did the math. If I gave Margot 60,000, I'd be left with about 152,000. At my age, with my expected lifespan that needed to last me 20 more years, possibly more, given that my mother is still alive at 89 and her sister made it to 94. That money was my safety net for things people don't think about until they happen. Long-term care, unexpected medical bills, a new roof, a new car, a broken hip. The things that would bankrupt me if I didn't have that cushion. I also thought about Margot's life. The 4-bedroom house, the private school, the speech therapist, the fake lemons. I thought about how she described her budget as having a gap, as if the gap were a fact of nature and not the result of choices they'd made. Nobody had forced them to put 3 kids in private school. Nobody had forced them into a house with a 3-car garage. And Dean's income, even in a down market, was still 3 times what I'd made at the peak of my career. But she was my daughter, and Braden, Sloan, and Jet were my grandchildren. And when your daughter calls you and tells you your grandchildren need something, you don't just say no and feel good about it. You feel it in your chest. You feel it like a failure, like you're the one who's falling short. I didn't sleep well that week. I'd lie in bed and think about the money, then I'd think about the kids, then I'd think about Margot's voice, that rehearsed, patient tone, and something about it would snag in my mind like a thread caught on a nail. I couldn't figure out why it bothered me so much. She'd made a reasonable case, in a way. The money would go to the kids. I did have my pension. I was comfortable, wasn't I? Then, on the Friday of that week, something happened that changed the way I saw everything. I was at the grocery store, the one on Hendersonville Road, in the cereal aisle, and I ran into a woman named Doreen who I hadn't seen in probably a year. Doreen used to work at the hospital with me. She'd been in billing, so we weren't close, but we were friendly. We did the usual catching up, and she asked if I was enjoying retirement, and I said I was. And she said she was too, and then she said something that stopped me cold. Did you hear about Carolyn Feeney? Carolyn Feeney had been a nurse supervisor on the 3rd floor. She'd retired 2 years before me. She was a sharp, funny woman who I'd always liked and who I'd heard had moved closer to her daughter in Virginia after retirement. What about Carolyn? Well, she moved in with her daughter, up near Roanoke, sold her house, put the proceeds into a joint account with her daughter's name on it, her idea. She wanted to help with the grandkids' college, help the daughter get settled. All very generous. That sounds like Carolyn. Sure, except the daughter and the son-in-law used the money for other things. Renovations, a boat. Carolyn didn't find out until she got a statement by accident and saw what was left. 63,000 gone. She confronted the daughter, and the daughter told her she'd agreed to it, and it was as much theirs as hers now because she'd put their name on the account. I stood there in the cereal aisle holding a box of oat clusters, and I felt the blood leave my face. Doreen, what happened to Carolyn? She's still living with them. She can't afford to leave. She tried to talk to a lawyer, but she didn't have any paperwork, and the account was joint, so legally there wasn't much to do. She's basically a babysitter now, watches the grandkids full-time while the daughter and son-in-law work. And she told me she cries in the bathroom at night because she can hear them through the wall talking about what to do with the rest of the money. I put the cereal in my cart. I thanked Doreen. I drove home, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought about Carolyn Feeney for a very long time. I wasn't Carolyn. My situation was different. Margot wasn't asking me to put her name on my account. She was asking for a specific amount for a specific purpose. But something about the story wouldn't let go of me. Not the details, the shape of it. A mother who gives what she has to her child, and a child who receives it as if it were always coming to them and then looks at what remains. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called my old friend Gloria, who I've known since I was 25 and who is the closest thing I have to a sister. I told her what Margot had asked. I told her about the 60,000, and I told her about Carolyn Feeney. Gloria was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Linnea, you need to protect yourself first. You've worked too hard to spend your last years being bled dry by a daughter who thinks your savings is a family fund." "She's not like that," I said. But even as I said it, I felt the words stick in my throat. "Maybe she isn't," Gloria said. "But if she isn't, then she should have no problem with you wanting to understand exactly where that money is going and how it's being managed." That was the thought that kept me up that night. Not the money itself, but the management of it. Because here's what Margot hadn't mentioned in our phone call, what she hadn't offered, what hadn't even seemed to occur to her. She hadn't said anything about setting up a trust. She hadn't mentioned a 529 plan. She hadn't talked about how the money would be tracked, accounted for, or protected. She'd simply said she needed it, the school needed it, and could I let her know by the end of the month? The more I thought about that, the more another feeling crept in. A feeling I didn't want to name. A feeling that lived right at the border between love and suspicion. A feeling that whispered that maybe the 60,000 was a first request, not a last one. that the gap Margot described wasn't a one-time gap, but a way of living, and that the end of the month wasn't really about the school deposit. It was about momentum, about catching me while I was still soft, still guilty, still willing to believe that saying no to your daughter was the same as saying no to your grandchildren. I decided I needed more information, and I knew exactly where to start looking. The next morning, I got in my car and I drove 2 hours east to Concord. I didn't call ahead. I told myself I was just going to visit the kids, bring them some books I'd picked up at the thrift store, see Sloane's new boots. But the truth is, I was going to look at the house, the cars, the life, to see if what Margot described as a gap looked, from the outside, like a family that was struggling or a family that had simply expanded its definition of normal until it could no longer fit inside its own budget. When I pulled up to the house, the first thing I noticed was that there was a new car in the driveway. Not new, but newer than the last time I'd been there. A dark blue SUV with temporary plates. I sat in my car for a full minute just looking at it, thinking about the conversation, the careful pauses, the school deadline, and then the SUV sitting there in the afternoon's sun like a contradiction. I walked up to the door. Margot opened it, surprised but happy, and the kids came running, and I held them and smelled their hair and felt that old, fierce love that makes you understand why people give everything away. And then Dean came around the corner from the kitchen, and he smiled at me, and he said, "Hey, Linnea, good to see you. Margot didn't mention you were coming by." "She didn't know," I said. "I was in the area." He nodded. He was holding a tablet, and I could see on the screen what looked like a real estate listing, a property somewhere with a big photo of a building and a price in the millions. He glanced at it, then tucked it under his arm. "New deal?" I asked. "Potential one. Early stages." He said it the way he always said things like that, vaguely, optimistically, as if the word potential was the same as the word done and the gap between them didn't exist. I spent the afternoon with the kids. I read to Jet. I helped Sloane with a puzzle. I watched Braden play a game on his tablet and asked him questions about it that he answered with far more patience than most adults would have. And the whole time, I was watching. Not spying. Watching. The way a mother watches. The way a mother has always watched, with one eye on the love and one eye on the truth. And what I saw over the course of that afternoon was a house that didn't look like a house in crisis. There was a new espresso machine on the counter, a package from a high-end children's clothing retailer on the hall table. The kids were wearing shoes that looked barely worn, in a house full of toys that could have stocked a small daycare. I drove home that evening with the books still in my backseat because the kids already had too many books, and I thought about all of it. The phone call, the new SUV, the espresso machine, the gap, and somewhere around the halfway point of the drive, on a stretch of I-40 where the trees close in on both sides and the road feels like a tunnel, I made a decision. I wasn't going to say yes, and I wasn't going to say no, at least not yet. I was going to do something neither Margot nor Dean expected. Something that a woman like me, a quiet woman who keeps her head down, isn't supposed to do. I was going to ask questions, real ones, with real consequences attached to the answers. And I was going to start at the bank. When I got home that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and I wrote down everything I knew. Every detail Margot had given me, every detail she hadn't, everything I'd seen at the house, every number I could remember from the phone call. And at the bottom of the page, I wrote a single sentence. They want $60,000. I want to know why they really need it. Then I picked up the phone and I called Margot, and when she answered, I said, "Sweetie, I've been thinking about what you asked. I want to help the kids. I really do. But before I make any decisions, I'd like to sit down together. You, me, and Dean. I want to go over the details, the numbers, the school costs, everything. And I'd like to do it at the bank, so we can talk to someone who knows how these things work. Make sure the money's set up right for the kids." There was a silence, longer than the pauses from the phone call. This silence had a different texture. It wasn't the silence of someone waiting to deliver a rehearsed line. It was the silence of someone recalculating. "Mom, that's not really necessary. We can just talk about it at home. I'd feel more comfortable at the bank, Margot. I want to make sure everything's done properly. For the kids." Another silence. And then she said, "Let me talk to Dean about it." Of course. "But Margot, the school deposit is due at the end of the month, right? So we should probably meet sometime this week." I said it gently. I said it the way a grandmother should say it, with warmth and concern and the full weight of a mother's love behind it. But underneath, for the first time in my life, I said it with something else. I said it knowing that I wasn't going to that meeting to write a check. I was going to that meeting to find out what my daughter was really asking me to pay for. Update 1. Margot called me back the next morning. She said Dean was on board with the meeting at the bank. I could hear something in her voice that hadn't been there before, a tightness, like a wire pulled one turn too many. She said Wednesday afternoon would work. I said that was perfect. We hung up after less than 2 minutes, and I sat there thinking about how the conversation had been so short. My daughter, who could talk for 45 minutes about a PTA meeting, had given me the bare minimum and gotten off the phone. That told me something. I didn't know what yet, but it told me something. Over the next 2 days, I did something I'm not proud of, exactly, but I'm not sorry about it either. I started digging. Not aggressively. Not the way someone in a movie would, with dramatic music and a corkboard full of photos and string. I just started paying attention in the way that only a mother can, with quiet, patient observation and the kind of institutional knowledge that comes from knowing a person from the moment they first open their eyes. I called Margot's older brother. Wait, I need to correct myself. Margot doesn't have a brother. I almost wrote that because it felt like the natural shape of the story, but the truth is messier than that, and I promised myself I'd tell this honestly. What I actually did was call Gloria. And then I called a woman named Patty, who used to be Margot's best friend in high school, and who still lives in the area, and who I've stayed in loose contact with over the years, mostly through Christmas cards and the occasional Facebook message. And then, because I was already in the car and driving past the exit for Concord anyway, I stopped at a coffee shop about 10 minutes from Margot's house, and I met Patty for a cup of tea. Patty is the kind of person who knows things. Not because she's nosy, although she is a little, but because she works at a title company in Kannapolis and she processes real estate transactions all day long, which means she sees things. Mortgages, refinances, liens. The paper trail of people's financial lives passes through her hands like water through a filter, and Patty catches things. She always has. We sat in a corner booth, and I ordered a chamomile, and she ordered a latte that was the size of a soup bowl. And we talked about nothing for a few minutes, her kids, my garden, the weather in a general sense. And then I leaned forward, and I said, "Patty, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked at me with those sharp, kind eyes of hers, and she set her latte down and she said, "Linnea, I've been waiting for you to ask." That sentence hit me like a slap. What do you mean? I mean, I've been sitting on something for about 3 months, and I didn't know if it was my place to tell you. And I've been going back and forth about it. And honestly, I'm relieved you're here because I was about 3 weeks away from calling you myself. My hands tightened around my mug. "Tell me what?" Patty looked around the coffee shop. It was mostly empty. A man with headphones by the window, a teenager doing homework. She lowered her voice anyway. "Dean came through our office about 3 months ago, not for a deal, for a refinance, on the house. Margot's house? Their house, yes. He was refinancing for cash out. Pulled out a significant amount of equity." I felt something cold move through me, not shock exactly, because I think some part of me had already been circling this possibility without letting it surface, but something close to it. A confirmation of a suspicion I hadn't allowed myself to fully articulate. "How significant?" Patty hesitated. She looked at me, and I could see her weighing professional ethics against personal loyalty, and I watched personal loyalty win, but not easily. "Linnea, I probably shouldn't give you exact numbers." "Patty." She closed her eyes for a second. 92,000. The coffee shop noise seemed to recede. The man with headphones, the teenager, the espresso machine hissing behind the counter, all of it went quiet, and there was just me and Patty and that number sitting between us on the table like a stone. "He pulled 92,000 out of the house," I said. "Cash out refinance. The new mortgage is bigger than the old one. Monthly payment went up by about $600. I sat back. I pressed my back against the booth, and I looked at the ceiling, and I did the math. Margot had told me there was a gap between what was coming in and what was going out. She described it as though it were a natural occurrence, a tide, something that had simply risen and left them struggling. But the gap wasn't a tide. The gap was $600 a month in additional mortgage payments created by Dean's decision to pull equity out of the house, and she hadn't mentioned it, not once. Do you know what the money went to? I asked. Patty shook her head. That's not something that shows up in our paperwork. The refinance itself is what I see. What they did with the cash after, I have no way of knowing. I nodded. I thanked her. I finished my tea, even though it had gone cold and tasted like nothing. And I drove home thinking about what I'd just learned and what it meant, and more importantly, what it meant about what Margot had told me and what she had chosen not to tell me. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again with my legal pad. I looked at the sentence I'd written the night before. They want $60,000. I want to know why they really need it. Below it, I wrote a new line. Dean refinanced the house for $92,000 cash out. Margot didn't mention it, and below that, I wrote, what did they spend it on? I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and I tried to think about it calmly, rationally, the way a radiologic technologist thinks about things, with precision and patience, and the understanding that sometimes the image you get isn't the image you expected, and you have to adjust your reading accordingly. But I wasn't reading an X-ray. I was reading my daughter's life, and the image was getting darker the longer I looked at it. I thought about the new SUV in the driveway, the espresso machine, the package from the high-end children's clothing retailer. Those things didn't add up to $92,000, not even close. So where was the rest of it? I didn't have an answer. But I had a meeting at the bank in 2 days, and I was starting to realize that the meeting wasn't going to go the way Margot expected. The night before the bank meeting, Margot texted me. It was a simple message, the kind that seems casual but isn't. Hey mom, just wanted to check, are we still on for tomorrow at 2? Dean wants to make sure he clears his schedule. I texted back, still on, see you at 2. Then, a minute later, another text from her. Just so you know, Dean is a little nervous about the bank thing. He feels like it's a bit formal. He said he'd rather just talk about it as a family. But I told him you want to do it this way, so he's fine with it. I read that text 3 times. I read it once for what it said, once for what it was trying to do, and once for what it revealed. Dean was nervous. Not about the money, about the bank, about the formality, about the idea of sitting across from a financial professional who might ask questions that were harder to answer than the ones I'd been asking. I set my phone on the nightstand and I closed my eyes and I thought about my daughter at 7 years old, standing in the kitchen of our tiny apartment, arguing that a later bedtime was her right, and how I'd looked at her then and seen someone who would grow up to be formidable. I had been proud of that. I had been proud of her fire, her certainty, her ability to build a case. And now I was lying in the dark, wondering if that same fire had become something I didn't recognize, something that burned in a direction I'd never anticipated. The next morning, I got dressed the way I would for a doctor's appointment. Clean clothes, sensible shoes, my good jacket. I drove to the bank, which was a small regional branch on the south side of Asheville, the kind of place where the tellers know your name and the manager has a framed photo of her dogs on the desk. I'd been banking there for 26 years. I knew the layout, I knew the people, and I'd asked, when I called to set up the meeting, for a specific person, a woman named Harriet Saldivar, who was the branch's financial services officer and who I'd worked with when I'd first set up my retirement account distributions. I arrived at 1:45. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, not because I was nervous, although I was, but because I wanted to be steady. I wanted the version of me that walked through those doors to be the version that had spent 40 years being calm in rooms where other people were panicking. The version that had held strangers' bodies in the right position while they were scared and in pain and didn't know what the images would show. That version of me, the one who knew how to be still and precise even when something was wrong. I went inside. Harriet was waiting for me in her office. She stood up when she saw me and she smiled and she said, "Linnea, it's been a while. How are you?" "I'm okay, Harriet. Thank you for making time." She'd set up the office with 3 chairs in front of her desk, a small pitcher of water and some glasses, a notepad. It looked like what it was, a space where something important was going to be discussed. I sat down and I told Harriet, briefly and privately before Margot and Dean arrived, what the meeting was about, and what I'd learned. I told her about the $60,000 request. I told her about the cash out refinance. I told her that I wanted to understand the full picture before I made any decisions, and that I needed her to ask the kinds of questions that a person like me, a mother sitting across from her daughter, might not be able to ask without emotion cracking through. Harriet listened. She nodded. She didn't say much, but I could see her processing it. The way I used to process an image, adjusting contrast, looking for the thing that didn't belong. And then she said, Linnea, I've seen this before. Not exactly this, but versions of it. And I want you to know that you're doing the right thing by being here. That was all I needed to hear. At 2:05, Margot and Dean walked in. Margot was wearing a nice blouse and her good earrings, the ones I'd given her for her 30th birthday. Dean was in a blazer. They looked like they were going to a parent-teacher conference. And in a way, I suppose they were. Just not the kind they expected. We sat down. Harriet introduced herself. She was warm but professional, the exact tone I'd hoped for. She said, So Linnea tells me you're looking at options for directing some of her retirement savings toward her grandchildren's education. That's a wonderful goal, and there are several ways to structure something like that. Before we talk specifics, I'd love to get a full picture of the current situation. Margot, would you like to start? Margot smiled. She glanced at Dean, who gave her a small nod, and then she began. She talked about the kids' school, the tuition increase, Braden's attention issues, Sloane's speech therapy, Jet's pre-K costs. She laid it out clearly, methodically, with numbers and timelines. She'd brought a folder, an actual folder, with printed sheets, itemized costs. It was impressive, in a way. My daughter, the little lawyer, making her case. Harriet listened, took a few notes, and then she said, That's very helpful. Now, to make sure we structure this correctly, I need to understand the overall financial picture. The reason is that if Linnea is going to make a significant contribution, we want to make sure it's going into the right vehicle, a 529 plan, or an educational trust, something that protects the funds and ensures they're used for their intended purpose. To set that up properly, I'll need to see how the funds are currently being managed on your end. She looked at Dean when she said that last part. Dean shifted in his chair. He smiled, that easy, confident smile he always had, and he said, Sure, of course. What do you need? Just a general overview. Income, current obligations, any existing education funds for the children, that sort of thing. It helps us determine the best structure. Dean looked at Margot. Margot looked at Dean. And in that look, that half-second glance, I saw something pass between them that I recognized immediately because I'd seen it before, in a different context, in a different life. It was the look two people exchange when they know the truth is about to be tested and they haven't agreed on which version of it to tell. Dean cleared his throat. Well, our income fluctuates because I'm in commission-based work. Last year was decent, but this year's been slower. We've got the mortgage, obviously the school costs Margot mentioned, car payments, the kids' activities. It adds up. I understand, Harriet said. When you say the mortgage, can you give me a sense of the current balance and monthly payment? Just roughly. Dean's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I can get them to you later. That's fine. Roughly. He gave a number. He gave a monthly payment. And I knew, because Patty had told me, that the number he gave for the monthly payment was the old one. The one before the cash-out refinance. He was sitting 3 feet from me in a bank, and he was understating his mortgage payment by $600 a month. I didn't say anything. I sat there and I let him talk. I watched Harriet's face, and I could see that she was noting the gap. Not because she knew what I knew, but because she was a professional who had been doing this for 20 years, and she could feel when numbers didn't sit right. She had that same instinct I'd had for 31 years, the one that told you when an image was off before you'd fully processed why. Harriet continued. She asked about existing savings, about whether they'd started a 529 for any of the children. Margot said they'd looked into it but hadn't set one up yet. She asked about Dean's business accounts, whether his commission income was through a firm or self-employment. Dean said it was a mix. She asked about other debts. Dean said just the mortgage and the cars. 2 car payments, Harriet asked. 2, Dean confirmed. I thought about the new SUV in the driveway. I thought about the number Patty had given me. And I thought about the distance between what Dean was describing and what I had seen with my own eyes, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something colder and more precise. The feeling of a person who has been given a piece of a puzzle and is now certain there are more pieces hidden. Harriet wrapped up the initial questions and said she'd need a few days to prepare some options and that she'd want to review them with all of us at a follow up meeting. She said, in the gentlest possible way, that it would be helpful if Dean could bring recent mortgage statements and any documentation of existing education related expenses so they could be sure they were building the right plan. Dean nodded. Margot smiled. We all stood up. We shook hands. We walked out of the bank and into the afternoon sun, and Margot looped her arm through mine and said, "That wasn't so bad, right?" She was nice. She was, I said. Dean's going to pull together those statements. It shouldn't take long. Good, I said. I want to make sure everything's done right. We hugged. Dean waved from the driver's seat of a car that wasn't the new SUV, which told me he'd chosen to drive the older vehicle to the bank, and that small, deliberate choice told me more than anything he'd said in the meeting. He was measuring appearances. He was curating the version of their life he wanted me to see. And the fact that he'd made that calculation, that he'd thought about which car to bring to a meeting where he was asking his mother-in-law for $60,000, that was the thing that settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't put down. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table. I didn't write anything on the legal pad this time. I just sat there in the quiet of my apartment, with the evening light coming through the window and the sounds of the complex outside, someone's dog barking, a kid on a skateboard, the ordinary world going about its business, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the day my husband walked out. I felt like I was being managed, not loved, not consulted, managed, the way a resource is managed, the way an account is managed, the way a person is managed when someone else has decided what they need from you and is working backward from that number to construct a story that will get them there. And sitting in that kitchen, in that light, with that feeling, I made a second decision. The first had been to go to the bank and ask questions. The second was bigger. The second was to stop asking questions of other people and start asking questions of myself. What did I actually know about my daughter's life? Not what she told me. Not what she showed me on Instagram. What did I actually know? And more importantly, what had I spent the last 8 years pretending not to see? Because the truth, the one that had been sitting in the back of my mind like a shadow on an X-ray that I kept choosing not to read, was that I'd been seeing signs for a long time. The way Margot's stories about Dean's work never quite matched the lifestyle they were living. The way she'd stopped mentioning specific numbers years ago, the way she'd started responding to questions about their finances with vague deflections. The way every visit to their house felt like a performance, everything arranged, everything presented, nothing accidental. The way Dean always had a new potential deal that never seemed to close, but always seemed to justify the next big purchase. I had seen all of it, and I had chosen over and over to file it under none of my business because that's what good mothers do. They trust, they support, they don't pry, they believe the best. But the $60,000 had changed the equation. Because when someone asks you for a third of your life savings, it becomes your business. When someone tells you their children need your retirement money more than you do, the terms of the relationship have shifted, and you either shift with them or you get taken apart by the current. I pulled out my phone and I did something I'd never done before. I opened Margot's Instagram, which I rarely looked at, and I started scrolling. Not through the recent posts, through the archived ones, going back months, years. And what I found, spread across 3 years of carefully curated photos and captions, was a life that bore only a passing resemblance to the life Margot described to me on the phone when she talked about gaps and tight budgets and the school deposit due at the end of the month. There were photos from a trip to Sedona, photos from a resort in Kiawa Island, photos of a renovated kitchen with new cabinets and a waterfall countertop that I was fairly certain hadn't existed the last time I'd been in their house. Photos of the kids in matching outfits from a brand I recognized because I'd once looked it up and closed the browser tab when I saw the prices. Photos of Dean at charity golf tournaments. Photos of Margot at a fundraising gala in a dress that I could tell, even through a screen, had not come from a discount rack. None of these things were crimes. None of them were proof of anything terrible. People take vacations, people renovate kitchens, people get dressed up and go to galas. But when you laid them side by side with the phone call about the gap, about the tight budget, about the school deposit they couldn't afford without my retirement savings, the contrast was so stark that I felt almost dizzy. I put my phone down, I picked up my legal pad, I wrote, "So trip, Kiawa Resort, kitchen renovation, gala, new SUV, cash out refinance for 92K, and they need 60K from me for school." I looked at that list for a long time, and then at the bottom of the page, in handwriting that was less steady than it had been at the top, I wrote one more thing. "Margot, what are you not telling me?" I set the pen down, I went to bed, and I dreamed about my daughter at 7 years old, standing in the kitchen, arguing for a later bedtime, and no matter what I said, she kept talking, kept building her case, kept smiling, and in the dream, I realized that she wasn't arguing with me at all. She was performing, she was delivering a speech she'd already rehearsed in front of a mirror, and I was just the audience. And the audience was supposed to clap at the end and give her what she wanted. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning with my heart pounding and the taste of something metallic in my mouth, the same taste I used to get before difficult exams in school, the taste of knowing that something was coming that I wasn't ready for but couldn't avoid. There was a text on my phone from Margot, sent at 11:47 the previous night. "Hey mom, Dean wanted me to ask, do you need the bank to set up the 529 thing? Or could we just do a direct transfer? He said it would be faster and we wouldn't have to wait for a second appointment." Let me know. I read that text in the blue light of early morning, and I felt the full weight of it land on me. They were trying to bypass the bank. They were trying to skip the structure, the documentation, the accountability. Dean had sat in that meeting, smiled, given incomplete numbers, driven the older car to manage appearances, and now, less than 12 hours later, he was already trying to root around the one thing I'd asked for, which was to do it properly. I set the phone down, I got out of bed, I made my oatmeal. I watched the sunrise through my kitchen window, the way the light moved across the parking lot and caught the wet grass from the sprinklers, and I thought about what it means to be a mother who has finally stopped pretending. The answer I was beginning to understand is that it means you have to become something you've never been before. Not soft, not accommodating. Not the woman who says, "Let me think about it," when what she means is, "I need time to figure out how to say no without losing you." It means you have to become the woman who finds out the truth and then decides what to do with it, even if the truth is something that changes everything you thought you knew about the person you raised. I finished my oatmeal, I washed the bowl, and I picked up the phone and I typed a reply to Margot that I rewrote 4 times before I sent it, because every version of it was either too sharp or too soft, and what I needed was something exactly in between. "No, sweetie, I'd prefer to go through the bank. I want everything documented and set up right." Harriet said, "It won't take long. Let's go ahead and schedule the follow-up. I think Dean mentioned he'd have the mortgage statements ready." I sent it. And then I sat at my kitchen table and I waited, because I knew, with the certainty of a woman who has read thousands of images and learned to trust what she sees, even when it's not what she was looking for, that what came next was going to tell me everything I needed to know. It took Margot 2 hours and 43 minutes to reply. When she did, it was a single sentence. "Dean says he'll have everything ready by Friday. No emoji, no love you, no warmth at all. Just information stripped bare, delivered with the kind of efficiency that tells you the real conversation is happening somewhere else, in a room you're not in, between two people who are trying to figure out how to adjust their plan now that the mother has stopped cooperating the way they expected." I looked at that text and I thought, there it is, the first crack. And I thought, there's more, there's always more. And I thought, I need to find it before Friday. Update 2. I need to tell you about what I did on Thursday because it's the day that changed everything. And I need to be honest about it, even though it's the part of this story that I'm least comfortable with. I drove back to Concord. I didn't call Margot this time either, but I also didn't go to her house. Instead, I went to the public library on Union Street, the one with the brick facade and the big oak tree out front. and I sat at a computer in the reference section for almost 3 hours. I want to be clear about what I was doing and what I wasn't doing. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I wasn't hacking anything or accessing private records. I was using public information, the kind that anyone with a computer and patience can find, but that most people never bother to look for because most people don't have a reason to. I had a reason now. I started with the county property records. Cabarrus County has an online registry, and I pulled up Margot and Dean's address. I found the original deed from when they'd bought the house 8 years ago, and I found the refinance documents from about 4 months ago, the one Patty had told me about. The original mortgage had been for $240,000. The refinanced mortgage was for $336,000. That meant they'd pulled out roughly $96,000 in equity, which was close enough to Patty's $92,000 that the small difference was probably fees and closing costs folded in. But here's what I also found. There was a second filing, a home equity line of credit taken out about 14 months ago for $50,000. That was separate from the refinance. That was a different instrument, a different lender, a local credit union. I hadn't known about that. Patty hadn't mentioned it, which meant it probably hadn't come through her office, which meant Dean had gone somewhere else for it, the way people do when they don't want the first person to see the full picture. I sat there looking at that second document and I did the math. $96,000 from the refinance, $50,000 from the HELOC. That was $146,000 in debt extracted from the house in just over a year on top of the original mortgage. And the house, according to the county tax assessment, was worth about $390,000, which meant they'd pulled out almost everything they had in equity. The house was nearly hollow. I felt that cold thing in my chest again, that precise clinical awareness of something wrong, the way you feel it when you position a patient for a scan and you see something on the scout image that you weren't expecting, something that doesn't belong. And before the radiologist says a word that the reading is going to be different from what anyone planned for. I kept going. I searched Dean's name in the state business registry and found that he was listed as the managing member of an LLC formed about 3 years ago. The LLC was called something generic, something with capital partners in the name, the kind of name that sounds like a financial firm but could mean almost anything. I wrote down the LLC's registration number and the address listed as its principal office, which turned out to be a commercial mailbox location, not an actual office. That was a flag. Not a red flag, maybe, but a flag. Companies use mailbox addresses for all kinds of legitimate reasons, but in my experience, people who are doing well, who have a real office and real operations, don't use a mailbox store as their headquarters. I couldn't find any records of actual real estate transactions associated with the LLC, but I also couldn't find evidence of Dean working for any established firm. When Margot had described his work to me over the years, she'd always said he was in commercial real estate, and I'd always pictured him working for a company, the way I'd worked for a hospital, with a desk and a badge and a payroll department. But the more I looked, the more it seemed like Dean was essentially on his own, operating through this LLC, and the potential deals he was always mentioning were just that, potential, not closed, not income-producing, potential. I sat back in the library chair and I looked at the screen and I thought about every conversation I'd had with Margot and Dean over the last 3 years, every visit, every phone call, every casual mention of work and money and plans, and I started to see the shape of something I'd been looking at for a long time without letting myself see it. Dean wasn't a man who was between deals. Dean was a man who was pretending to be a man who was between deals. The blazer, the confident smile, the early stages language, the tablet with the listing on it, the performance of success without the substance of success. He was running an operation that looked like a business from the outside, but didn't produce income from the inside, and he was financing the appearance of that business and the lifestyle attached to it, with debt extracted from the house. And Margot knew. She had to know. You don't refinance your house and take out a second line of credit without signing papers. You don't watch your husband not work, not close deals, not bring in income, while the mortgage goes up and the car gets newer and the trips keep happening, without understanding that something is fundamentally wrong with the math. But she hadn't told me. She'd called me and told me about the gap, the school costs, the tight budget, the kids' needs, and she'd done it with rehearsed pauses and a deadline. She'd presented a version of their financial situation that was accurate in its details but false in its totality. The way a person can tell you 10 true things and still be lying because the truth is the 11th thing they didn't say. I drove home from the library in a state that I can only describe as numb. Not sad, not yet. Not angry, not clearly. Numb, the way you go numb after an injury, before the pain really arrives, when your body is still deciding how much it can afford to feel. That evening, I called my mother. She's 89, lives in a assisted living facility in Clemson, South Carolina, about 2 hours south of me. She's sharp. She still reads the newspaper every morning and does the crossword in pen, and she has a way of cutting through things that I've spent my whole life both admiring and being slightly afraid of. I didn't tell her everything. I told her Margot had asked for help with the kids' school and that I was looking into the details before making a decision. I told her I'd found some things that worried me. I didn't give her numbers. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Linnea, I'm going to tell you something your father said to me once, and I want you to think about it. My father left when I was 23, long before my husband left, and he said very few memorable things during the time he was in my life. So I was curious. What did he say? He said, the people who love you will never ask you to go hungry so they can eat comfortably. He wasn't talking about food. He was talking about everything. I held the phone and I looked out my kitchen window at the parking lot and the wet grass and the ordinary evening, and I thought about that sentence, and I thought about Margot on the phone telling me the kids needed my retirement savings more than I did. And I felt something inside me that had been holding on, some last thread of belief that maybe I was overreacting, maybe I was being suspicious, maybe there was an explanation for all of this that would make sense. That thread snapped. Not dramatically, not with a bang. Just quietly, the way a thread snaps when you've been pulling on it for too long and you suddenly realize you're holding two pieces and the connection is gone. I thanked my mother. She said, call me when you figure it out. And she hung up because she's 89 and she's not going to sit on the phone when she's said what she has to say. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed and I thought about everything I'd found, and I thought about everything I'd seen, and I thought about the meeting at the bank and about Dean's too small mortgage number and his decision to drive the older car, and about Margot's text messages, the warmth draining out of them as it became clear I wasn't going to just hand over the money. And I realized something that I'd been circling around for days without landing on it. This wasn't about $60,000 for school. The school was real. The kids' needs were real. Braden's attention issues were real. Sloan's speech therapy was real. Jet's pre-K was real. But the $60,000 wasn't really for those things, because if it had been, they would have been eager to set up a 529 plan, eager to document it, eager to have a bank officer oversee it. They'd have wanted the structure, because the structure would have protected the money and ensured it went where they said it was going. Unless, of course, it wasn't going where they said it was going. The $60,000 was to fill a hole. The hole that Dean had been digging for 3 years with refinances and HELOCs and a lifestyle built on the appearance of success rather than the fact of it. Margot wasn't asking me to invest in her children's education. She was asking me to cover the gap between the life Dean was performing and the life they could actually afford, and she was using the kids as the front, the way a person puts a nice frame around a picture to make you not notice what's actually in the image. And the worst part, the part that kept me staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. with my hands flat on the mattress and my breath measured and shallow, was that I couldn't tell where Margot the mother ended and Margot the accomplice began. Was she scared? Was she drowning in a situation Dean had created and desperate enough to reach for the only lifeline she had, which was me? Or was she a participant, a co-architect of the performance? Someone who had looked at my retirement account and seen not a mother's lifetime of sacrifice, but a resource that could be tapped if she framed the request correctly. I didn't know. And not knowing was the thing that was killing me, because the difference between those two versions of my daughter was the difference between someone who needed saving and someone who needed stopping, and the actions required for each were so different that choosing wrong would mean either abandoning her or enabling her, and either way, something would be broken that I couldn't fix. Friday came. Dean was supposed to have the mortgage statements ready. Margot texted me at noon to say that Dean had been swamped with work and hadn't had time to gather everything, but he'd have it by Monday. She suggested we push the follow-up bank meeting to the end of the week. I said that was fine. I said, take your time. I said I wanted to make sure we did this right, so there was no rush. And then I did something I'd been thinking about since the library. I called a lawyer. Not a big firm, not someone intimidating, just a sole practitioner in Asheville named Raymond Okafor, who a friend of Gloria's had used for estate planning and who had a small office above a bakery downtown. I explained my situation in general terms. I told him about the 60,000 request, about the cash out refinance, about the HELOC, about the LLC with a mailbox address, about the lifestyle I'd observed versus the financial picture I'd been given. I told him I wasn't trying to start a war. I was trying to understand what my options were and how to protect myself. Raymond listened. He was quiet, the way good listeners are quiet, not the way people are quiet when they're waiting to talk. And then he said something that reframed everything. Linnea, you've been looking at this as a financial question, and it is. But there's a more important question underneath it. Who has access to your accounts? Who has your power of attorney? Who's listed as your emergency contact, your beneficiary, your representative on your healthcare directive? I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Because the answer I'd given years ago when I'd set up my retirement distributions and my estate documents and my advance directive, the answer that had made sense at the time, because Margot was my only child, and I trusted her completely, was Margot. Margot was my beneficiary. Margot was my power of attorney. Margot was my healthcare proxy. Margot was listed on my retirement account as a transfer on death beneficiary. Margot, I said. She's listed on everything. Raymond was quiet again. Then he said, I'd like to suggest you consider updating those documents before you make any decisions about the $60,000. Not because your daughter has done anything wrong, but because right now, if something happened to you, your daughter and her husband would have access to the entirety of your remaining assets, and based on what you've told me about their financial behavior, that's a risk you should at least consider. I sat in that office above the bakery, with the smell of bread coming up through the floor, and I felt the ground shift under me. Not because Raymond was telling me something I didn't know, because he was telling me something I'd known and hadn't faced. That I had set up my entire financial life so that if anything happened to me, everything I had would flow directly to Margot, and by extension, to Dean. And I'd done it at a time when I had no reason to question that arrangement, and I hadn't revisited it, because revisiting it would have meant admitting that I had a reason to. I thanked Raymond. I paid him for the consultation. I drove home and I sat at my kitchen table and I stared at the legal pad and I thought about all the lines I'd written, all the questions, all the pieces, and I realized that the story I'd been telling myself about my daughter, the story where she was struggling and needed help, and I was being asked to make a sacrifice for my grandchildren, that story was a children's book version of something much darker and much more complicated. The real story, the one I'd been circling for weeks without landing on, was that my daughter had married a man who was performing a life they couldn't afford, had gone into debt to maintain that performance, had looked at my retirement savings as the next available resource to draw from, and had come to me with a rehearsed, deadline-driven, guilt-anchored request that used my grandchildren as leverage. And she had done it knowing that she was already positioned to receive everything I had left if something happened to me, which meant the $60,000 wasn't just a request. It was a preview. I sat there for a long time. The light in the kitchen changed from afternoon to evening to dusk. The sounds outside shifted from children coming home from school to dogs being walked for the last time to the quiet that settles over a complex at night. And somewhere in that quiet, I heard my phone buzz. It was a text from Margot, not to me or not directly. It had been sent to a group thread I didn't recognize, a thread that included Margot, Dean, and a name I didn't know, someone named Fletcher. And it had been forwarded to me by accident or sent to me by accident because I could see the full thread, and what I saw made the numbness I'd been feeling all day crack open into something else entirely. The text from Margot to Dean and Fletcher read, "She's not going to just hand it over. She wants to go through the bank. We need to figure out the statement thing before Friday, because if the bank sees the HELOC, they're going to ask questions, and Mom's going to lose it. Dean, just tell her the refinance was for the kitchen and we'll deal with the rest later. Fletcher, can you hold off on the other thing for 2 more weeks? The other thing. What other thing? Who was Fletcher? What was being held off? I stared at that text and I felt every suspicion I'd had, every careful theory I'd constructed, every measured clinical observation coalesce into a single terrible clarity. This wasn't just about the money anymore. There was something else. Someone else. Something being coordinated between Margot and Dean and a third person I'd never heard of, and they were managing my response to the bank meeting with the same precision and planning that they'd managed the original phone call. My hands were shaking. I set the phone down on the table and I pressed my palms flat against the wood, the way you press your hands against something solid when the world is moving underneath you, and I took a breath and then another, and then I picked the phone back up and I screenshotted the text because I'd spent 31 years working in a field where documentation was everything, where the image was the evidence, where you didn't make claims without something to show. And even in that moment, with my heart hammering and my vision blurring, some part of me knew that I was going to need proof. I screenshotted it and I sent the screenshot to Gloria and I wrote, "Call me, now." Gloria called me in 40 seconds. I read her the text. She was quiet for a long time and then she said, "Linnea, you need to find out who Fletcher is." "I know. And you need to do it before that follow-up meeting at the bank." "I know that too." "Then you need to go back to Concord, not to Margot's house. You need to go to that mailbox location, the one listed as the LLC's address. You need to see what's actually there. And you need to look at Dean's LLC filing more carefully. Because if Fletcher is connected to that business, there may be more to find." I told her she was right. I told her I'd go tomorrow, Saturday. She said she'd come with me. I told her she didn't have to. She said she was coming, and that was the end of that discussion, because Gloria has been my friend for 38 years, and she knows when I need someone to tell me what to do, because I'm too tired to figure it out myself. I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen. I looked at the screenshot on my phone, and I read Margot's words one more time. If the bank sees the HELOC, they're going to ask questions, and Mom's going to lose it. She knew about the HELOC. She knew the bank would ask questions. She knew the questions would expose things she didn't want me to see. And she was coordinating with Dean and someone named Fletcher to prevent that from happening. My daughter wasn't drowning. My daughter was steering, and the water I'd been watching was rising because she was pouring it. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, and I felt something I'd been holding back for weeks, something I'd been keeping in a room in my chest that I'd shut the door on every time it tried to open. Grief. Not for money, not for the 60,000. For the version of my daughter that I'd believed in, the one who'd called me that Tuesday evening with rehearsed pauses and a deadline, the one who'd said the kids needed my savings more than I did, the one who'd looked at me with her arm looped through mine outside the bank and said that wasn't so bad, right? All of it, every word, every gesture, every carefully constructed sentence, it had been a performance. And I had been the audience, and the audience was supposed to clap and give her what she wanted. But I wasn't going to clap. I was going to go to that mailbox location on Saturday with Gloria, and I was going to find out who Fletcher was, and I was going to walk into that follow-up bank meeting next week, not as the mother they'd been managing, but as someone they hadn't planned for. I was going to walk in knowing the truth, and the truth was going to change everything. Final update. Gloria picked me up at 7 on Saturday morning. She drove because she said I was in no condition to be behind a wheel, and she was right. I'd slept maybe 2 hours the night before, and when I looked in the mirror that morning, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Not old exactly, I've never minded aging, but worn. The way a person looks when something they've been carrying has started to show on the outside because there's no more room inside. We drove east in Gloria's old Camry with the windows down because the air conditioning had been broken for a year, and Gloria refused to fix it on principle, the principle being that she'd rather spend the money on her grandchildren. We didn't talk much for the first hour. Gloria has this quality, this ability to sit with someone in silence without it feeling empty, and I've always valued it because most people fill silence with noise, and noise is the last thing I needed. When we were about 20 minutes from Concord, I told her about the text. I read it to her again, word for word, and I watched her jaw tighten in that way it does when she's processing something that makes her angry, but she's not going to let the anger out yet, because there's work to do first. "Fletcher," she said. "That's the name we need to crack. That's what I was thinking. And the mailbox address." The LLC's registered address. It's a commercial mailbox place on Union Street, right in town. Not far from the library. Gloria nodded. She took the exit and we drove through Concord, past the familiar streets and storefronts and the turnoff to Margot's neighborhood, which I pointedly did not take, and we pulled up in front of a small strip mall. There was a nail salon, a dry cleaner, a cell phone repair shop, and in the middle, a place that called itself a packing and shipping center, with a sign that had been fading since for at least 5 years. We went inside. It was a small shop with rows of metal mailboxes on the wall behind the counter, the kind of place where people get P.O. boxes when the post office is too far or too crowded. There was a young man behind the counter, maybe 25, with earbuds in and a magazine open in front of him. He looked up when we walked in. I hadn't planned what I was going to say. I'd been so focused on getting here that I hadn't thought past the door. But Gloria had. She walked up to the counter and she smiled at the young man and she said, "Hi there. I'm trying to reach someone who has a box here, and I was wondering if you could help me." The young man pulled one earbud out. "Who are you looking for?" "Dean Holloway," Gloria said. "He's my nephew. I was supposed to meet him here to pick up some documents, but he's not answering his phone and I wanted to make sure I had the right address." I stood slightly behind Gloria and I watched the young man's face. He glanced at the computer screen, typed something, and then he frowned. "I can't give out information about box holders, ma'am." "I understand. I'm not asking for personal information. I just want to know if he still has a box here. I've been mailing things to this address, and I want to make sure they're not sitting in a box he doesn't use anymore." The young man looked at Gloria, then at me, and then back at Gloria, and I could see him doing the math that young people do when they're trying to decide if a request is weird or just inconvenient. He typed something else. "I can't confirm or deny, ma'am. Company policy." Gloria smiled again, unfazed. "Of course. I understand. Can I leave a note for him in case he comes in?" "Sure." Gloria took a piece of paper from her purse and wrote a brief note with Dean's name on it and a fake phone number, and she folded it and slid it across the counter. The young man took it, opened a small filing box behind him, and placed it inside. And as he did, I saw something, taped to the inside of the filing box, a list. A handwritten list of box holders with their box numbers. I couldn't read most of it from where I was standing, but I could read the top of it, and the first name on the list was Holloway D, with box number 147. More importantly, the third name on the list was Reeves F. Fletcher, Fletcher Reeves. The name on the LLC filing I'd found at the library had been Dean's, but there was another name I hadn't looked for, another member of the LLC, someone who was part of whatever Dean was doing, someone Margot had been texting about holding off on the other thing. I didn't say anything. I took Gloria's arm and we walked out of the shop and into the Saturday morning sun, and I told her what I'd seen. "Fletcher Reeves," Gloria said. "Now we have a name." We sat in the car in the strip mall parking lot for 10 minutes while I searched Fletcher Reeves on my phone. I didn't find much. No prominent social media presence. No LinkedIn profile that looked right. But I did find one thing. A property record from 2 counties over in Iredell County for a small commercial property, a warehouse on a quarter-acre lot that had been purchased about 2 years ago by an LLC. Not Dean's LLC, a different one. And the registered agent for that LLC was listed as Fletcher Reeves, and the business name was Reeves and Holloway Ventures. Reeves and Holloway, Fletcher and Dean. They were in business together, not the Capital Partners LLC I'd found, but a second entity, one that had purchased actual property, a warehouse, 2 years ago. I pulled up the address of the warehouse on my phone. It was in a town called Troutman, about 35 minutes north of where we were sitting. Gloria looked at me. I looked at her. She started the car. The warehouse was on a side road off the main highway in a small industrial area with a few other buildings, a plumbing supply company, an auto body shop, a fence company. It was a metal-sided building, nothing fancy, with a gravel parking lot and a roll-up door that was closed. There was one car in the lot, a pickup truck. And on the door of the warehouse, a sign with the same business name, Reeves and Holloway Ventures. We parked across the street. I didn't get out. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew that sitting and watching was something I was good at. I'd spent 31 years in dark rooms watching images form on screens, waiting for the picture to tell me what it meant. Gloria and I sat in that car for almost an hour. We watched the warehouse. Nothing happened for the first 20 minutes. Then a second vehicle pulled into the lot. A white van. No markings. A man got out. He was tall, maybe 40, with a baseball cap and a clipboard. He went to the roll-up door, unlocked a side entrance, and went inside. About 10 minutes later, the side door opened again, and a second man came out. This one I recognized, even from a distance, even from behind, even sitting in a car across the street. It was Dean. He walked to the white van, opened the passenger side, and pulled out a box. Then another box. He carried them to the side door and took them inside. A few minutes later, the first man came out and helped him carry several more boxes. Then the roll-up door opened partway, and I could see just barely inside the warehouse. I could see shelving, rows of shelving, and on the shelving, boxes. Dozens of boxes, maybe more. I looked at Gloria. She looked at me. "What do you think is in those boxes?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I think it's not commercial real estate." We sat there for another 15 minutes. Dean and the other man, presumably Fletcher Reeves, carried boxes in and out of the van. At one point, Fletcher opened one of the boxes on the ground and pulled something out. Even from a distance, I could see it was a product of some kind, packaged, retail ready. He held it up to the light, examined it, put it back, and closed the box. Then something happened that made everything sharper. A third vehicle pulled into the lot, a sedan. A woman got out. She was wearing a dress and sunglasses, and she carried a tote bag. She walked to the side door, knocked, and went inside, and I recognized her walk, her posture, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. It was Margot. My daughter was at the warehouse. At a warehouse owned by a business that Dean had never mentioned to me, co-owned by a man named Fletcher whom Margot had been texting about, in a parking lot on a Saturday morning while I was supposed to believe Dean was swamped with work gathering mortgage statements. I didn't move, I didn't get out of the car, I didn't confront anyone. I sat there and I watched my daughter walk into a building I'd never heard of, associated with a business I'd never been told about, and I let the reality of it settle over me like a weight I was finally strong enough to hold. Margot was inside for about 20 minutes. When she came out, she was carrying a different bag than the one she'd gone in with. She put it in her trunk, got in her car, and drove away. Dean and Fletcher continued working for another few minutes, then closed the warehouse and left in separate vehicles. Gloria and I drove home. We didn't talk for the first hour. When we finally did, I said something that I'd been forming in my mind since I watched Margot walk into that building. Dean isn't in commercial real estate. He's running some kind of operation out of that warehouse with Fletcher. Product, inventory, boxes, whatever it is, it's not what he told me. And Margot knows about it. She's involved. Agreed, Gloria said. And the $60,000 isn't for the kids' school. It's to keep whatever they're doing afloat. The house refinance, the HELOC, those were to fund the warehouse. And now they've burned through that money and they need more. And I'm the next available source. "Linnea," Gloria said carefully, "what are you going to do?" I was quiet for a long time. The road stretched out in front of us, and the trees closed in on both sides, and I thought about my mother in Clemson doing her crossword in pen, and about Carolyn Feeney crying in a bathroom in Virginia, and about my retirement account with its careful, patient, 3-decade balance, and about my grandchildren, Braden and Sloan and Jet, who were real, who did need things, who were caught in the middle of something they didn't create and couldn't control. "I'm going to the bank on Tuesday," I said. "I'm going to the follow-up meeting that Harriet set up. Margot and Dean are going to show up with their incomplete statements and their careful performance. And I'm going to be there with the information I have. And I'm going to let the truth come out in a room where someone else is watching, because if I do it alone, Margot will talk me out of it. She's been talking me out of things since she was 7. Gloria nodded. "Do you want me to come?" "No. This has to be me." Tuesday came. I spent the weekend preparing. I called Raymond Okafor and told him what I'd found. He advised me on what I could and couldn't say in a bank meeting, what was appropriate to raise and what wasn't, and how to keep the conversation focused on the real issue, which was my money and my decision about what to do with it. I called Harriet privately and told her I had additional information that would change the context of the follow-up meeting, and I asked her to let me speak first. She agreed. At too late on Tuesday afternoon, I sat down in Harriet's office at the bank. Margot and Dean arrived a few minutes later. Dean was in his blazer again. Margot was wearing the same earrings. They sat down. Harriet smiled. I smiled. Everyone was very polite. Harriet said, "Before we get into the options I've prepared, Linnea had something she wanted to share." I looked at my daughter. I looked at my son-in-law. I took a breath, The kind of breath you take before you position someone for a scan. The kind that's steady and measured and tells your body that you're in control even when your hands want to shake. Margot, I said, I love you. I love the kids. I have always wanted to help, and I want you to know that everything I'm about to say comes from that place. Not from anger, not from judgment, from love. Margot's smile flickered. She glanced at Dean. Mom, of course. What is it? I know about the cash-out refinance, I said. I know about the home equity line of credit for $50,000. I know about the LLC. I know about the warehouse in Troutman. I know about Fletcher Reeves. The room went very still. Not quiet. Still. The way a room goes still when the air has been pulled out of it. Dean's face changed. The smile didn't drop so much as collapse, like a set that had been held up with tape and someone had pulled the tape. Margot's face did something different. She went pale, and then she went blank, and the blankness was worse than any expression, because it was the face of someone who was already calculating, already running the numbers on a new version of the story, already looking for the angle that would turn this into something she could manage. Mom, I don't know what you think I know you texted Fletcher to hold off on the other thing because the bank might see the HELOC and I'd lose it. I know you sent that text to a group thread and you sent it to me by accident. I have it. Margot's blankness cracked. Underneath it was something I'd never seen on my daughter's face before. Fear. Not the fear of being caught, the fear of being seen. The fear of someone who has spent years constructing a version of themselves and just watched it come apart in a room where they can't control the narrative. Dean started to speak. Linnea, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I said, but I don't need you to. What I need is for you to understand that I'm not giving you $60,000. I'm not giving you any money. Not because I don't love the kids. Not because I don't love Margot. Because the money I saved is the result of my life's work, and I will not pour it into something I don't understand, something that was misrepresented to me, something that uses my grandchildren as a reason and a warehouse operation as the reality. Harriet sat behind her desk with her hands folded, letting this happen, being the witness I needed her to be. Not intervening, not mediating. Just being present the way a professional is present, with weight and authority, and the implicit message that this is a real room and what is said here matters. Margot looked at me and her eyes were wet and her voice was small and she said, Mom, the kids need. I know what the kids need, I said. The kids need a grandmother who can pay her own bills in 20 years. The kids need parents who are honest about their finances. The kids need to not be used as a reason to take money that was earned before they were born by a woman who went without so that someday she wouldn't have to ask anyone for anything. I stopped. I took another breath. I looked at my daughter and I saw her, really saw her, not the performance, not the rehearsed pauses, not the carefully curated Instagram life, but the woman underneath all of it. The woman who had married someone who couldn't support the life they were living and had chosen to maintain the illusion rather than face the truth, and who had looked at her mother's savings as the solution because it was easier to ask me than to tell Dean to stop. I'm not cutting you off, I said. I'm not abandoning you or the kids. What I'm doing is this. I'm setting up a small educational fund for the children, directly through Harriet, with specific provisions for Braden's school, Sloan's therapy, and Jet's pre-K. A modest amount. Enough to help. Not enough to save you from a situation you created. That part is yours to fix. Margot was crying now, not loudly. Just tears running down her face while she sat in the chair with her hands in her lap, and I could see Dean sitting next to her, rigid, his jaw working, the performance fully gone, and what was left underneath was a man who was scared and angry and trying to figure out how to regain control of a room that had slipped away from him. There's one more thing, I said. I've updated my power of attorney, my healthcare directive, and the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts. Margot, you're still my daughter and you'll always be my daughter. But you are no longer listed as my sole representative or beneficiary. I've restructured things so that my assets are protected and managed by someone whose judgment I trust in the way I used to trust yours. I didn't say who. I didn't need to. The point was made. Margot looked at me, and she opened her mouth, and she closed it, and she opened it again, and she said, "Mom, I'm sorry." And I believed her. I believe her still. But I've learned at 63 that sorry and trustworthy are not the same thing, and that someone can be genuinely sorry and still do it again, and that protecting yourself from the person you love most in the world is the hardest thing a mother can do, and also sometimes the most necessary. We left the bank. Dean walked ahead, not speaking, not looking back. Margot walked beside me, and she didn't loop her arm through mine. She just walked. We got to the parking lot, and she turned to me and she said, "Are you going to tell people about this?" "I already have," I said. "I told the people who needed to know, not to punish you, to protect myself, and to make sure that if something happens to me, the decisions about my life and my resources are made by someone who's making them for me, not for themselves." She nodded. She got in her car. She drove away. That was 3 weeks ago. I've seen the kids twice since then. I drove to Concord the following Saturday and took them to the park. Braden showed me a new game on his tablet. Sloan collected rocks. Jet said actually in every sentence, and it was in fact hilarious. Margot was polite but distant. Dean wasn't there. I didn't ask where he was. The educational fund is set up. Harriet manages it. Braden's school deposit was paid on time. Sloan's speech therapy is covered for the year. Jet's pre-K starts in 2 weeks. The kids are taken care of, not the way Margot asked for, not in the amount she wanted, but taken care of in a way that's transparent, documented, and protected from anything that might pull it off course. The warehouse is still there. I don't know what's in it. I don't know what Fletcher and Dean are doing, whether it's legitimate or not, whether it will succeed or fail. That's not my business anymore. What's my business is the line between my life and theirs, a line I should have drawn years ago and didn't, because I thought that loving my daughter meant making myself available to her in every way, including the ways that cost me everything. I've learned that it doesn't. I've learned that love without limits isn't love, it's surrender. And a mother who surrenders everything ends up with nothing to give and no one to catch her when she falls. My retirement account has $198,000 in it. I check it every Tuesday morning. I look at the number and I think about every year, every shift, every patient, every night I came home tired and didn't order takeout because takeout was $12 and $12 was $20 in the account and $20 was someday. And I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I feel like it's mine, like I earned it, like the woman who earned it deserves to keep it. Last Sunday, Margot called me, not to ask for anything, just to talk. She told me Braden had gotten a good report from school. She told me Sloan had said a new word in therapy. She told me Jet had learned a new word too, and that the word was mine, and that he said it about everything. About his toys, about his cereal, about the dog next door. He says it about things that aren't his, Margot said. I tell him, "Jet, that's not yours," and he just says, "Mine," and grabs it. I listened to that and I thought about it and I said, "That's a phase. He'll grow out of it." And Margot said very quietly, "Yeah, I guess we all have to." We talked for a few more minutes. She said she'd send me pictures from Sloan's next therapy session. I said I'd love that. We hung up. I sat at my kitchen table. The light was coming through the window the way it does in the late afternoon, warm and slanted, catching the leaves of the tomato plant on my balcony. My phone was on the table. My legal pad was in the drawer. The screenshot was saved in 3 places. And I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, in the life I'd built with my own hands, and I felt something that was not peace, exactly, because peace implies the absence of pain, and there is still pain. There will be pain for a long time, maybe always, the kind of pain that comes from seeing your child clearly and choosing to love her anyway while refusing to be consumed by her. But underneath the pain, there was something else, something solid, something that felt like the floor of a house that had been shaking for years and had finally been reinforced. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but something before forgiveness and after anger, something that has no name but that I think might be the truest thing a mother can feel for a child she can no longer save. The decision to stay, to love, and to keep what's yours. Story 3. My son said selling my late wife's jewelry would solve his problems. Then I discovered why he wanted it gone. So quickly, my wife Karen died 14 months ago, and for most of that time, I moved through the house like a man walking through water. Panic attacks at 3 in the morning, grief counseling I went to twice and then stopped, the whole thing. People at work kept telling me I was handling it well, which I never knew how to answer, because I wasn't handling anything. I was just waiting. Waiting for the weight to lift, waiting for the day I could open the closet without flinching. That closet, the one in our bedroom with the cedar shelves that still smelled like her perfume, Chanel No. 5. The one her sister Diane gave her every Christmas because Karen refused to buy it for herself. And on the top shelf, tucked behind a stack of sweaters she never got to wear in her last months, there was a dark blue velvet box, her jewelry. Everything she had in the world that was precious and small and hers. I couldn't touch that box for a year, couldn't even look at it. Then one Sunday, maybe a month ago, I was cleaning out her side of the dresser because our daughter Emily was coming home for the weekend, and I wanted the guest room to feel less like a museum, and I found myself standing on my toes with my hand on that blue velvet. I brought it down slow, like it was a living thing. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it, and I cried harder than I had in months because there it all was. Karen's engagement ring, the diamond she'd picked out at a little shop in Wheaton, not the biggest stone, but she said it caught the light like a drop of water. The pearl necklace we'd bought on our honeymoon in Maui, the one she'd worn to every dinner out for 30 years. The gold charm bracelet her mother had started for her when she was a girl. Charms added for every birthday and every milestone. A tiny baby carriage for Emily. A football helmet for Tyler. And the sapphire ring, the one that had belonged to Karen's grandmother, that her mother had slipped onto her finger the day we got married and told her it had been in the family for 4 generations. I sat there and held each piece and let myself grieve her all over again, and I promised her, out loud, alone in that room, that I would never let any of it go. I should have known Tyler would find out about that moment. Not the crying part, he didn't need to know that. But somehow, within 2 weeks, my son, who had barely called me for months, suddenly had a whole lot of opinions about what I should do with my dead wife's things. Tyler is 23. He lives in an apartment in Lombard with 2 roommates, both of whom I've met exactly once, and he works in sales at a dealership, one of those big shiny lots on Roosevelt Road. He's a good kid, or he was, or I thought he was. He has Karen's eyes, that pale blue, and her smile, the one that could get him out of anything. He was a handful in high school, nothing serious, just the usual stuff, sneaking out, a D in chemistry, a girlfriend I didn't like, but he grew out of it. He got a degree in marketing from a school I could barely afford, and he'd been doing fine, as far as I knew. He paid his rent, he had a car, he had a girlfriend named Lauren, who worked at a boutique in Oak Brook and posted a lot of pictures of herself with iced coffees. I liked Lauren, actually. She seemed nice, polite. Called me Mr. Hanson, always asked how I was doing with a softness in her voice that told me she knew about Karen. The first time Tyler brought up the jewelry, we were at my kitchen table, and I was making us both breakfast, which was a thing I'd started doing, Sunday pancakes, because I figured if I didn't invent new routines, the old ones would eat me alive. He was scrolling through his phone and he said, "Out of nowhere, Dad, I've been thinking. You know Mom's jewelry is still in that box in your closet, right?" I looked at him over the pan. "Of course I know. Why wouldn't I know? Because it's been over a year," he said, still looking at his phone, "and it's just sitting there, collecting dust. That stuff is worth a fortune, you know? Mom had good taste. It's not about the money, Tyler. Everything is a little bit about the money, Dad." He finally looked up, and he smiled at me with Karen's smile, and I felt my chest tighten. Look, I'm not saying sell it to be cold about it. I'm saying, what would Mom want? She'd want it to be useful, right? She'd want it to help her family. And honestly, man, it's kind of sad, isn't it? A box of beautiful things nobody ever gets to see. It's like a museum no one visits. I set the spatula down. I'm not selling her jewelry. Okay, okay. He held up both hands. Just a thought. No pressure. It's your call, Dad, obviously. But it wasn't just a thought, because a week later, he showed up at my house on a Tuesday night, which he almost never did, no call, no warning, just walked in the front door holding a 6-pack of beer, and he sat on the couch and told me about his problems. The problems were real, I'll give him that. His rent was going up. The dealership had changed its commission structure, and he'd had 2 bad months in a row. Lauren wanted to move in together, which meant a bigger place, and a bigger place meant a deposit, and he had maybe $900 in savings. His car, a 5-year-old Honda, he'd bought new, needed new brakes and a new transmission, and he'd gotten a quote for $4,000 that had made him physically pale. He laid it all out for me with the earnestness of a kid presenting a science fair project, and I listened, because I'm his father, and when your kid opens up to you, you listen. "I'm not asking for a handout," he said, twisting the cap off a beer. "That's not what this is. I'm just saying there's money sitting in your closet, Dad. Real money. And I'm not a kid anymore. This is my life, and I'm drowning a little, and you've got this thing that could change everything for me, and Mom would want that. She loved me. She'd want her baby boy taken care of." My throat went tight at that, because it was true. Karen had loved him more than anything on this earth, and there was a version of this conversation where I gave in just on the weight of that love alone. But there was something off in the way he said it, something rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in front of his bathroom mirror. Tyler, I said, your mother would want me to take care of you too, and I can help you with rent. I've got a little put away. It's not a fortune, but, Dad, I don't want your retirement money. He shook his head, and here's the part I'll never forget. He looked at me and he said, that jewelry is dead weight for a dead woman. He called his mother dead weight, in my kitchen. And then, like he hadn't just said it, he picked up his phone and started scrolling again, which I think was even worse, because it meant the sentence hadn't even registered with him. It was just words to him. I stood there with the cold air of that sentence blowing through me, and I said very quietly, I think you should go. Dad, come on. I didn't mean it like that. I think you should go. He went. And I sat down on the couch and stared at the wall for a long time, and I didn't cry, mostly because I was too angry to cry. But I also felt something else, something small and hard and cold in my stomach, and it took me a while to name it. It was suspicion, because Tyler had never once in his life cared about the value of Karen's jewelry. He'd never even asked about it. And now he was bringing it up over and over like it was the only thing on his mind. A son grieving his mother doesn't usually think first about the liquid cash value of her pearl necklace. Something was off. The thing is, I might have let it go. I might have chalked it up to a desperate kid saying stupid things, which is a category I'd filed plenty of Tyler's behavior in over the years. But then the pieces started to add up. The small pieces. The ones that mean nothing alone and everything together. 3 days after that kitchen conversation, I went to the attic to look for our tax returns from a few years back, and I passed by the cedar closet. And I don't know why I did it, but I stopped and I pulled the box down again. I just wanted to look, I told myself. Just to look. I opened it, and for a moment everything seemed fine, the ring, the pearls, the sapphire, the charms. And then I counted the charms on the bracelet because I knew that bracelet like the back of my hand, knew every charm on it, and there were only 9 charms on the chain when there should have been 10. Karen had added a tiny silver Eiffel Tower charm the summer she took Emily to Paris, and I could see the little gap in the chain where it should have been, the open space like a missing tooth in a smile. My heart dropped into my shoes. I went through the box again, slower this time, piece by piece, and the Eiffel Tower charm was definitely gone. Everything else was there, just that one charm. I stood there with the box in my hands and thought, no way, maybe it fell off. Maybe it was in the bottom of the box, under the velvet. I turned the whole thing out onto the bed, ran my hands along the lining, checked the corners, and nothing. The charm was gone, and it hadn't fallen off because I'd held that bracelet a month ago, the Sunday I cried over it, and all 10 charms were on it. I remembered counting them. I remembered specifically stopping at the Eiffel Tower and thinking about Karen at that little cafe in Montmartre, her laughing with Emily, the postcards she'd mailed me every single day. I called Diane that night, Karen's sister, the one who'd given her the perfume every Christmas. We'd stayed close after Karen died, closer than we'd ever been, talking on the phone every couple weeks, both of us knowing we were the only 2 people in the world who missed her exactly the same way. Diane, I said, this is going to sound crazy, but Karen's charm bracelet is missing a charm, the Eiffel Tower, and I'm trying to figure out if maybe she gave it to someone, or if she took it off for some reason, or if you have it, or, honey, Karen gave me one of Aunt Rose's old brooches before she passed, Diane said, her voice going gentle the way it always did when we talked about her sister. But she never mentioned the charm bracelet. She wouldn't take a charm off that bracelet. You know she wouldn't. That bracelet was her childhood. She liked it exactly the way it was. I know. Is everything okay over there, David? You sound different. Yeah, I said. Yeah, I'm fine. Probably just my old eyes miscounting. I hung up and I stood in the dark kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I knew I hadn't miscounted. Which meant somebody had taken the charm out of that box. And the only person in my life who had been talking about the box with any frequency had been my son. I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't. I spent the next week inventing explanations because that's what parents do. We build little bridges of denial over the rivers between us and the truth. Maybe Emily had taken it, I told myself. Emily, who was a nurse in Madison now, who had always had a soft spot for her mother's things. I called Emily. Hey, sweetheart, did Mom ever give you the Eiffel Tower charm off her bracelet? And Emily, who is her mother's daughter in every way that matters, heard the fear in my voice and said, Dad, what are you talking about? You're scaring me. Is something wrong with the jewelry? No, nothing's wrong, I said. I was just going through it and I got confused. That's all. Dad, Emily, I'm fine. Go back to your shift. I love you. She didn't sound convinced, but she let it go, and I hung up and marked another suspect off my list, which left Tyler. And I hated that. Hated it like a physical thing, like a splinter under my nail that I couldn't get out. I kept replaying his words from that night at my kitchen table. Dead weight for a dead woman. And then the way he'd gone quiet, the way he'd looked at his phone, the little flicker of something in his eyes that I'd been too slow to read. So I started watching, not stalking, not following him around, just watching, noticing. And what I noticed made my blood run cold in ways I can't fully describe. The first thing I noticed was that Tyler had money suddenly. Not a lot, but more than he should have had for a guy who'd told me a week earlier that he had $900 in savings. He showed up at my house the following Saturday in a new pair of Air Jordans I knew retailed for $200 because my own students wore them. He had a new watch, a silver one with a big face, not a Rolex, but not cheap either. When I asked him about it, he said, got a bonus. And when I asked what for, he said, closed a big deal. And there was a beat of something in the air, a half second of something unreadable on his face before he changed the subject to the Bears game. The second thing I noticed was that Lauren looked nervous. I ran into them at a restaurant in Glen Ellen, a Thai place Karen and I used to go to, and she hugged me a little too tight and asked me questions with a little too much enthusiasm, and her eyes kept flicking to Tyler, like she was checking something with him. Tyler told me they were thinking about that apartment, the one they wanted to move into together, and Lauren said, soon, in a voice that sounded like an apology. The third thing I noticed was the phone call. We were in my driveway. Tyler had stopped by on a Sunday afternoon to help me carry some boxes to the garage, and his phone buzzed and he looked at the screen and his whole face changed. It was quick, a fraction of a second, but I saw it. The color drained out of him and he thumbed the call away and then sent a text with shaking hands. I didn't say anything, but I looked. I couldn't help it. It was right there in his hand, and the preview of the reply he'd just sent read, I told you I'm working on it. Friday. You'll get your money Friday. And the name at the top of the thread wasn't Lauren. It was a name I'd never seen before. Marcus. Friday, I thought. Friday came in 4 days. And my son, who had $900 in savings and was suddenly wearing $200 shoes, owed somebody named Marcus a lot of money by Friday. I didn't confront him then. I know I should have. I know that now, and I'd give anything to go back to that moment in the driveway and grab him by the shoulders and shake the truth out of him. But I didn't, because a part of me still didn't want to know. A part of me was still building those little bridges of denial, and I walked right out onto them. Because the alternative was accepting that my son had stolen from his own dead mother, and that was a weight I wasn't ready to carry. Not yet. The jewelry came up again on Tuesday. Tyler called me, and his voice was bright, too bright, the way it got when he was selling something, and I recognized it because I'd heard him talk to customers at the dealership on speakerphone once. He was selling me on his own mother's things. Dad, listen, I found a guy, he said. A legit dealer, works out of a shop in Cicero, been in business 30 years. I told him about Mom's jewelry, described the pieces to him, and he said it's a beautiful collection, he'd pay top dollar, no questions about provenance or anything like that because it's family stuff. That's not stolen, it's inheritance. He'd cut us a check on the spot. Whole box, one transaction, done. We could split it whatever you want, 50-50, 60-40, your call. And there it was. The whole thing out in the open. The whole thing, or almost the whole thing. My hand tightened on the phone and I took a breath and I said, as calmly as I could manage, Tyler, how do you know what's in that box? What? The jewelry. You said you described the pieces to him. How did you describe them? Did you look in the box? I've seen it before, Dad. It's not like it's a secret. You showed it to me the one time at Christmas, remember? I didn't show you the box at Christmas. I never showed you that box. Nobody has opened that box except me. And I lied a little there, held my breath waiting, and now you know exactly what's inside, don't you? There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him breathing, hear the little hitch in his breath, and I could picture him standing somewhere, maybe in his apartment with his hand over his eyes, trying to think fast. When he spoke again, the salesy brightness was gone, and what was left was thinner, younger, more honest. Dad, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help us. Please, don't make this weird. Help us how? By selling your mother's jewelry to a pawn dealer in Cicero? It's not a pawn shop, he's a dealer. Tyler, I said, and my voice cracked because I was standing in my bedroom looking at that blue velvet box, and I could see the gap on the bracelet, the missing charm like a wound. Where is the Eiffel Tower charm? The silence that came back was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I counted the seconds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the line went dead. He hung up on me. My son hung up on me rather than answer that question, and I stood there in the bedroom with the phone in my hand, and the last little bridge of denial collapsed into the river, and I knew. I should have called the police right then. That's what everybody tells me when I've told this story. My brother in law, my neighbor Frank, the guys at work. You should have called the police and made a report and let the law handle it. And maybe they're right. But Tyler is my son. He is my son, the little boy who used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms and fall asleep with his head on Karen's shoulder, who she'd stroke his hair and hum that old lullaby, who wore the little football helmet charm on her bracelet without ever having a football in his life. He is my son, and I couldn't call the police on him without knowing the whole truth first. I couldn't. I had to see it with my own eyes. So I did something I'm not proud of. On Wednesday, while Tyler was at work, I drove to his apartment in Lombard. I had a key. He'd given me a key 2 years ago when he first moved in, said it was in case of emergencies, and I'd never used it, but I used it then. I let myself into his apartment, and his roommates weren't there, and I stood in the middle of his living room with my heart hammering in my throat, telling myself I was doing this for his own good. For all of us. I found it fast, faster than I expected, which told me it wasn't well hidden, which told me he wasn't careful, which told me he didn't think I'd ever come looking. It was in the top drawer of his dresser, under a pile of t-shirts, a beige paper envelope from a shop called Gold and Pawn on Cicero Avenue, and inside that envelope was a pawn ticket. And on that ticket was a description that made the world tilt sideways. 1 strand, white pearls, 41 pearls, 18-inch, Maui, and a date. The date was 4 weeks earlier. 4 weeks before he ever came to my house and said the word jewelry, and the amount was $3,800. He'd been to the pawn shop before he ever asked me the first time. He'd already taken the pearls. 4 weeks before the Sunday pancakes, before the beer on the couch, before dead weight for a dead woman, he'd gone to a pawn shop in Cicero with his mother's pearl necklace, the one she wore on our honeymoon, the one she'd worn to every anniversary dinner for 30 years, and he'd walked out with $3,800 and a ticket he kept like a receipt for a bad decision he could still reverse. And the charm, the Eiffel Tower charm, that must have been a test run. A little piece easy to hide, easy to justify, to see if I'd notice. And I'd noticed, and he'd panicked, and instead of stopping, instead of putting the pearls back, he decided the only way out of the hole was to go deeper. Sell the whole box before I could check it again. Get the money, pay Marcus, be done, and hope I never counted the pearls and the charm and everything else he'd already burned through. I took a picture of the ticket with my phone. Then I put it back exactly where I'd found it, under the third t-shirt in the pile, and I walked out of his apartment, and I sat in my car in the parking lot, and I cried. I cried for Karen, and I cried for Tyler, and I cried for the fact that I was going to have to choose between them, because that's what it was, and I'd never felt so alone in my entire life. I didn't know about Marcus yet, not the details. I knew about the text about Friday, and I knew about the pawn ticket, and I knew that was a hole big enough to swallow a kid whole. But I didn't know the shape of it, the size of it, the teeth of it, not yet. That came Thursday night, and it came the way these things always come, through the people who think they're protecting someone. Lauren called me at 9 o'clock. I don't think she'd ever called me before in her life, and when I saw her name on the screen, I knew something was wrong before I even answered. Mr. Hanson, she said, and her voice was shaking. I'm sorry to call you like this. I'm really sorry. But I didn't know who else to call, and I can't keep it in anymore. What's going on, Lauren? Is Tyler okay? He's not. He's really not okay, and I think you need to know. I think somebody needs to know because he won't tell you and he won't tell anybody, and he's in way over his head, Mr. Hanson. Like way, way over his head. And then she told me. It came out in pieces, messy and tearful and hard to follow, but I put it together. It started with sports betting, the apps, the ones that are legal now, and make it so easy that you don't even feel like you're gambling. You just feel like you're checking the scores. He'd started about a year ago, right around the time Karen got really sick, which I understood because I know what a person will do when they're drowning in grief and helplessness and they can't fix the one thing that matters. He lost a few hundred, lost 1,000, chased it, won a little, lost more. Then he found crypto, the meme coins, the ones the guys on Twitter shill, and the ones that go up 10,000% and then go to zero in an afternoon. He put in $5,000. Then he put in 10, then 20. And the account went down and down and down, and instead of getting out, he got a loan. That's where Marcus came in. Marcus is not a bank. Marcus is a man who lends money to desperate people at 4% a week, and he collects it personally, and he doesn't accept extensions, and his collection methods are not what you would call friendly. Tyler borrowed $15,000 from Marcus to cover his crypto losses. Then he borrowed another 10, then another 5, and the interest was compounding, and the payments were coming due, and Tyler was in sales at a dealership with a commission structure that had just gotten worse, and he was $30,000, then 40, then 50, and by the time Lauren found out, which was about 6 weeks ago, he was into Marcus for $62,000, and Marcus had given him a deadline. Friday, Lauren said. He has to pay by Friday. Marcus said if he doesn't have it Friday, they're going to take his car and his apartment keys, and they're going to make an example of him. He's scared, Mr. Hansen. He's so scared. And I keep telling him to just go to his dad, and he says he can't. He says you lost enough. He says he won't be the one who takes the last good thing from you. I sat on my couch with the phone pressed to my ear, and I thought about my son, and I thought about that pawn ticket, and I thought about the pearls in a display case in Cicero next to somebody's wedding ring and somebody else's dead father's watch. And I thought about how he'd said dead weight for a dead woman, and what that must have cost him, how sick he must have been to say it out loud, how much he must hate himself in there, underneath all the panic and the salesmanship and the lies. Lauren, I said, thank you for telling me. You did the right thing. I'm going to handle it. Please don't tell him I told you. Please. He'll be so mad at me. He won't be mad at you, sweetheart. I promise you. He won't be mad at anyone except himself. I hung up and I sat there for a long time in the dark of my living room, and I made a decision. Not the decision everyone expected me to make. Not the one where I drove to the pawn shop and bought the pearls back. Though God knows I wanted to do that first. I wanted to walk in there with my credit card and bring her necklace home where it belonged. But that would only fix the symbol. It wouldn't fix my son. It wouldn't fix the $62,000, and it wouldn't fix Friday. So I made the other decision. The harder one. The one that felt like putting my hand inside my own chest and grabbing a hold of my own heart. Friday morning, I called in sick to work. I haven't called in sick in 11 years, and my principal literally asked me if I was dying, and I told her I was dealing with a family matter, which was true enough. Then I drove to Lombard. I didn't call first. I just showed up at Tyler's apartment at 7 in the morning, let myself in with the key, and found him sitting at his kitchen table with his head in his hands and a stack of papers in front of him, and he looked up at me with eyes that were red and swollen and full of a fear I have only ever seen on the faces of men who know they're about to lose everything. Dad, he said, and his voice broke on the one word. Sit down, I said. We're going to talk. I can't, Dad. I can't do this today. I have a thing. I have to be somewhere. You're not going anywhere, Tyler. You're staying right here, and you're going to tell me the truth. All of it. Starting with the pearls. He went white. White as a sheet, white as the pearls themselves, and he opened his mouth and nothing came out, and then he put his face in his hands and he started to cry. Not the fake kind of crying, not the kind he'd used on Karen to get out of trouble when he was 12. This was the real thing, ugly and wet and shaking, the kind of crying that comes from a place way down deep where a person keeps all the things they can't admit to themselves. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know where else to go. I'm sorry about the pearls. I'm sorry about the charm. I was going to buy them back. I swear I was. I was going to get the money and buy them back and put everything back and you'd never have to know. $62,000, I said. That's what the man's name is, Tyler. That's your whole story. $62,000 and Marcus and Friday. He looked up at me and there was something in his eyes that I will never forget. A mix of relief and shame and terror, like a man who's been holding his breath underwater and finally sees the surface. You know, Lauren told me. Oh God. He put his head back in his hands. Lauren, I told her not to. I told her good for her, I said. She's the only person in this whole mess who did the right thing. And you're going to thank her when this is over. But first, you're going to answer me. Why? Not the gambling. I know why people gamble. I know what grief does to a person. Why did you take your mother's necklace? Of all the things in the world, why that? And he told me. And the answer was somehow both worse and more human than I expected. Marcus hadn't just given him a deadline. Marcus had given him an idea. When Tyler had gone to Marcus to beg for more time, Marcus, who probably has 100 sons like mine in his book, had looked at him and said, "What do you got? What's worth anything? You got a car? Family? Your people got anything good?" And Tyler, desperate and stupid and drowning, had mentioned his mom's jewelry. And Marcus had said, "There you go then. Bring me that. I know a guy, buys whole lots, pays cash, no questions. You bring me that box and we're square." And Tyler had said, "No, no way, not that. Anything but that." And Marcus had said, "Then bring me 62 grand by Friday or we start taking things." So Tyler, to prove he could do it, had taken the charm first, one small piece, had gotten $140 for it, and told himself it was just one tiny thing, just a test, just a sample of whether he could actually go through with it. And then 4 weeks ago, he'd taken the pearls, because the pearls were the ones worth real money, and he'd told himself he was going to buy them back by Friday and give Marcus the cash and hand me back the necklace, and everything would be fine. Except he hadn't saved the money. Of course he hadn't. He'd paid Marcus the interest, and he'd bought the shoes and the watch, because when you're that deep in a lie, you start telling a second lie. The lie that you're fine, that you're winning, that everything is under control, and you buy yourself the costume of a man who has his life together. And the rest of the money was gone into the same hole that had eaten everything else, and now it was Friday, and he didn't have $62,000, and he didn't have the pearls, and the only thing left in the whole equation was the blue velvet box in my closet. "So you were going to sell it all today," I said. "The whole box. My whole life with your mother, in a bag, to a stranger in Cicero, before the sun went down." He didn't answer. He just sat there crying, and in that moment I wanted to grab him and shake him until his teeth rattled, and I also wanted to hold him, and I did neither. I sat down across from him, and I took a deep breath, and I said the thing I'd been planning since 9 o'clock the night before. "Here's what's going to happen, Tyler. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say it once. I'm not giving you the jewelry. I'm never giving you the jewelry. That box goes back in the closet today, and it stays there, and if you ever touch it again, I will call the police and I will report it stolen, and I will press charges, and I will mean it. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Do you understand me?" He nodded, miserable, the tears still running down his face. "I'm not giving Marcus any money either. You're going to call him right now from this phone, and you're going to tell him you're coming to see him today, and you're going to meet him face to face, and you're going to bring him me." "What?" He looked up, terrified. "Dad, no, you don't know him. You don't know what he's like. He's not a guy you negotiate with. He's not a guy I've been a teacher for 30 years, I said. I've talked down more desperate people than your Marcus has ever shaken down. And if that doesn't work, I've got the next best thing. The pawn ticket. He's got a wife, doesn't he? A business? A boss? The shop on Cicero Avenue, the one he does business with, they keep records of everything that comes across that counter, and they hand those records to police officers who ask nicely, and I'm a very polite man when I want to be. You're going to talk to him, and I'm going to talk to him, and we're going to get this settled. And you're going to owe me the $62,000, every dollar of it, principal and interest, not to him, to me. You're going to pay it back at the rate of $1,000 a month. You're going to move out of that apartment and back into your old room. You're going to give me your credit cards and your keys and your phone, and you're going to go to Gamblers Anonymous twice a week, and you're going to go with me to the pawn shop in Cicero and buy back your mother's pearls with the first real paycheck you earn, and until they're back in that box, you're going to carry the weight of what you did every single day. That's the deal. That's the only deal on the table. Take it or leave it." He stared at me, and I watched the fear in his eyes slowly turn into something else, something I hadn't seen in his face for years. Respect, maybe even a little awe. "You'd do that for me? After everything I did?" "I'm your father," I said. "That's what the job is. Now get your shoes on. We've got a man to see." Marcus's office turned out to be the back room of a smoke shop in Cicero, and I'll admit my knees were shaking when I walked in. He was a wall of a man, maybe 50, with a thick gold chain and eyes that had seen every scam and sob story in the book. Tyler walked in ahead of me, white as a ghost, and Marcus looked up from his desk and said, Well, the baby bird comes home to the nest. You got my money, kid?" "He's not here to give you money," I said, stepping forward, and Marcus's eyes slid to me, surprised, maybe, that there was an older man in his office, and he said, "Who the hell are you?" "My name is David Hansen," I said. "I'm his father, and I'm here to make you an offer." Marcus leaned back in his chair, and there was something almost amused in his eyes, the way a cat looks at a mouse that's trying to negotiate. "An offer. I like offers." "What kind of offer?" "The kind where you walk away from my son, and you don't take anything from him, and you never contact him again. In exchange, I don't walk out of here and call the police." I laid the pawn ticket on his desk, face up. "This is a ticket from Gold and Pawn in Cicero, dated 4 weeks ago. The property on it is a pearl necklace that belongs to my late wife's estate. It was taken from my home without my knowledge or consent. That's theft, Marcus. Clean and simple. And I am a patient and reasonable man, and I would rather settle this between us than make a phone call. But I will make that phone call. Marcus picked up the ticket and looked at it, and then he looked at me, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. And then he laughed. A big, warm, almost friendly laugh, the kind of laugh that had probably charmed 100 panicking borrowers into signing 100 bad deals. I like you, Hanson. I like you a lot. Most dads come in here swinging. You came in here with paperwork. Okay, he set the ticket down. Here's my offer. Your son owes me $62,000. You're telling me you're not paying it. That's a problem for me. But I'm a businessman, and I'm a father myself, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take the necklace, the whole collection, whatever's in that box you've all been crying over, and we call it even. He brings me the box Monday, and he's out. Clean slate. Nobody calls anybody. Deal? No, I said. Marcus's smile didn't flicker, but something behind his eyes shifted. No, that necklace is my wife's. It's not for sale at any price, and it's especially not for sale to you as payment for a gambling debt my son got into with bad advice from an older man who should have known better. Here's my counteroffer. You take nothing today. You forgive nothing. You tear up his note, and I pay you $15,000, which is the principal he actually borrowed from you after I've done the math on what he said. And you and I both know he borrowed 50 to 55 at most before you started stacking interest on it. 15,000 today, cash, out of my retirement, and you are done with my son forever. And if you say no, I walk out that door, and I have a very good lawyer, and I have a pawn receipt, and I have plenty of time. Marcus looked at me for a long time. I could see him weighing it, the same calculation I'd made in my own kitchen the night before, risk against reward, the certainty of 15,000 against the uncertainty of a police investigation and a lawyer and a man with nothing left to lose. And then he showed his teeth in something that wasn't quite a smile, and he said, "You're a tough son of a bitch, Hanson." Guess that's where the kid gets it. Fine, 15. And I keep his phone number in my book, and if he ever comes back to me looking for money again, I'm going to give you a call personally, and you can come pick him up before I do something I'll regret. Deal, I said. I had the cash in an envelope in my car because I am the kind of man who prepared for Friday by going to the bank at 4 in the afternoon and emptying out my savings like a man buying his way out of a war. I went out and got it, and I walked back in and set it on his desk, and he counted it once, counted it twice, and then he tore up a piece of paper in front of us, Tyler's note, and he stood up and shook my hand, and I felt his grip, firm and real, and I saw something in his eyes that I'll never be able to fully name. Respect, maybe. Or the acknowledgement of one soldier to another that the fight is over and both sides are still standing. And then we walked out of that smoke shop, my son and I didn't look back, and neither did he. We drove home in silence. Halfway there, Tyler said, in a voice so small I barely heard it. You paid him my debt. You spent your retirement on me. You shouldn't have. I don't deserve that. No, I said, keeping my eyes on the road. You don't. But your mother loved you, Tyler, and I love you. And that's why I did it. Not because you earned it. Because you're mine. He didn't answer. He stared out the window at the suburbs rolling past, and I saw his shoulders start to shake, and I let him cry, because he needed to. And because I was crying a little myself, and because there are some conversations you have with your children that don't need words. Monday, I went to the pawn shop in Cicero alone. I stood at the counter with the pawn ticket in my hand, and I explained the situation to the man behind the glass, a tired-eyed man named Raphael, who had probably heard 100 versions of this story and believed none of them. He brought out the pearls from the case behind him, and I looked at them, and I knew them. Every pearl, the way they'd gone slightly rose gold in the middle of the strand, the clasp that Karen had fixed twice in 30 years, the tiny scratch on the second pearl from the night she'd dropped it on the bathroom floor at our hotel in Maui. I paid him the $3,800 plus the interest, and he wrapped them in tissue paper and put them in a little white box, and he said, "I'm sorry for your loss, sir," and I believed he meant it. I drove home with the pearls in my pocket. And I went up to the bedroom, and I took down the blue velvet box, and I lifted out the bracelet. I looked at the gap where the Eiffel Tower charm used to be for a long time. Then I opened the little white box, and I put the pearls back in their place in the velvet, and I closed the lid. And I stood there with my hand on the box, and I said out loud to Karen, to myself, to whoever was listening, I'm bringing her home. I'm bringing her home. The charm is still missing. Tyler could only tell me the name of the shop where Marcus's buyer worked, and that buyer had sold it weeks ago, and the trail went cold. I could have pressed it, I could have called the police and made them chase a $140 charm through every jewelry shop in Cook County. But I let it go because there are some debts that can't be paid back with money, and because Tyler has spent every weekend since then at that shop and every other shop for 20 miles looking for it, and because I know he'll find it or he won't, and either way he's carrying it now. That was 3 months ago. Tyler is living in a small room in the basement of my house now. He moved home the week after we made the deal, and he gave me his credit cards and his phone, and he gave up the apartment in Lombard, and Lauren, God love her, stuck with him through all of it. And she comes over for dinner on Sundays now, and she helps me cook, and she calls me Mr. Hanson, and I've started to think of her as one of us. Tyler got a different job, a job where he gets paid a base salary and no commissions, a warehouse supervisor gig that he hates, but he comes home every night with his shoulders straight, and he goes to Gamblers Anonymous twice a week in a church basement in Glen Ellen, and he's been clean for 91 days, which he tells me about every single day, and I pretend I don't notice that he's counting, and I'm prouder of him than I've ever been in my life. He's paying me back $500 a month, which is all he can afford, and I take it because he needs to know what it costs, and I bank every dollar of it in an envelope in my desk drawer, and I'm not sure what I'll do with it when it's done. Maybe I'll give it back to him someday for a down payment on a house, or maybe I'll buy him and Lauren a wedding, or maybe I'll just keep it, a reminder that my son walked through fire and came out the other side, and I was the one who held the ladder. I haven't decided. I don't have to decide yet. That's the mercy of a long life. As for the box, it's back on the top shelf of the closet in its place behind the sweaters. I opened it yesterday because it was Karen's birthday, and I held the pearls, all 41 of them, and I held the sapphire and the ring and the bracelet with its 9 charms and its 1 empty space, and I thought about how close I came to losing all of it, and how close my son came to losing himself, and I thought about what Karen would say if she could see us now. I think she'd be sad, in a way, to know what Tyler did, but I think she'd also understand, because she was the most forgiving person I ever knew, and she always said that love isn't about what people deserve. Love is about what you give anyway. I'm not telling this story to be praised. I'm telling it because somewhere out there, there's a parent who's finding things missing from their house and a kid who's in over their head, and they're both too scared to say the words out loud. So you say them. You say them first, even if it's the hardest thing you ever do, even if it means going to a smoke shop in Cicero and making a deal with a man named Marcus. You say them, and you carry the weight, and you bring your people home. That's the job. That's always been the job. The pearls are in the box where they belong. The charm is still out there somewhere. Tyler is upstairs right now, asleep in the basement, and in a few hours he'll get up and eat the breakfast I left him and go to his job he hates, and come home and tell me he's been clean for 92 days. And I'll pretend to be surprised, and I'll ask him if he wants to look at the box again, and he'll say no, not yet, and I'll say okay, no rush, and we'll both know what we're both thinking. My wife Karen died 14 months ago. Her jewelry is still in the closet. Everything that matters is still here. That's the only ending I need. Story 4. My new daughter-in-law called me a burden at dinner. The next morning, I received a letter with her name on it. The words came out soft, like she was saying something kind. Mom, we need to talk about you. Everyone at the table went quiet. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I looked up at Vanessa, my son's new wife, and she was smiling at me. That small, patient smile she used when she was explaining something simple to someone slow. I know you don't like hearing it, she said, but with Daniel's promotion, we need the extra room. And honestly, you are becoming a bit of a burden, she said it, right there, at my own dinner table, in my own house. I did not say a word. I just set my fork down, picked up my glass of water, and took a sip. Daniel stared at his plate like it held the answers to the universe. My sister Carol, who sat across from me, opened her mouth, then closed it again. Nobody spoke up for me. Not my son, not my sister. Not one person said a single thing. I looked at the wall clock above the stove, 7:42. I would remember that number for the rest of my life. 7:42. The minute my son's wife called me a burden, and my own blood sat there and let it happen. I smiled at her. I see. Vanessa's smile got brighter. She thought she had won. She reached over and patted my hand like I was a dog that needed calming. See? I knew you would understand. That's why we love you, Mom. Love me. She said she loved me. I have lived in this house for 37 years. My husband James and I bought it when we were 24 years old, with almost nothing to our names. We painted every wall ourselves. We planted every tree in the yard. We raised our son in the upstairs bedroom with the yellow curtains that James insisted on because he said every child should wake up to sunshine. James died 3 years ago. Cancer took him slow, the way it does when it wants to hurt everyone. I sat by his bed for 6 weeks. I held his hand. I told him I would take care of Daniel and that he did not have to worry about anything. "I know you will," he whispered. "You are the strongest woman I ever met." Those were his last words to me. I buried him in the plot we bought together in 1995, side by side, with my name already carved next to his. Some people think that is morbid. James and I thought it was romantic. Two names on one stone. Until the end. I did not know, sitting at that dinner table with my son's new wife calling me a burden, that the ground underneath me was about to shift. I did not know that the letter arriving the next morning would change everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. Vanessa came into Daniel's life 2 years ago. He was 31, single, working long hours at the tech company that paid him well and drained his soul. We met her for the first time at a diner on Route 9. She ordered a salad with the dressing on the side, then sent it back twice. Daniel watched her with this goofy, love-struck smile that I had not seen on his face since he was a boy. I wanted to like her. I really did. When your only child brings home the person they love, you want to see the best. I saw a woman who was polished, pretty, always perfectly dressed, always with the right words. She complimented my house. She asked about James. She teared up when Daniel told her how he passed. Looking back now, I think that was the moment I should have paid attention. She cried about my husband, a man she never met, and I felt closer to her because of it. That takes a certain kind of skill. The kind of skill that knows exactly which buttons to press. They dated for 8 months. Then Daniel proposed, and Vanessa said yes. The wedding was beautiful. James would have loved it. There were white flowers everywhere, which James always said were overrated, and a band that played songs nobody danced to, and a cake that cost more than my first car. I paid for half of it. Vanessa's parents paid for the other half. Daniel told me she insisted on splitting everything equally, which I thought was fair and mature. Now I know the truth. She insisted on splitting the wedding so that every bill would be in writing. So that when she came for the house, she would have a record of who contributed what. I did not see it then. I was just a mother, happy for her son. 6 months after the wedding, Vanessa started making changes. It began small. A new sofa that she said matched her vision better than my old one. My sofa was 20 years old, worn soft in all the right places, the one James and I fell asleep on 100 times. She replaced it without asking. Daniel told me she was just excited to make the house feel like ours. Ours. That word. That was when I first felt it. "I bought this house with your father," I said gently. "I know, Mom," Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he was uncomfortable. "But we're a family now. We should make it feel current." Current. My son, who used to cry on my shoulder when he was scared of the dark, was telling me my 37-year-old home needed to feel current. I let it go. Because that is what mothers do. We let things go. We swallow the small hurts because we tell ourselves they are just small. But small hurts stack up. They pile on top of each other until one day you are standing in your own kitchen, and you cannot breathe, and you realize the pile has been there for years. The kitchen was next. She repainted the cabinets white. Then the guest room became her office, even though she worked from home 1 day a week. Then my pantry, the one where I kept my mother's recipes and my grandmother's china, became her wellness corner with a yoga mat and a shelf of supplements that cost more than my groceries. I never said a word. I kept telling myself it was fine. She is young. She is excited. She is making the house hers because she is making the family hers. Just be patient, I told myself. Just be a good mother-in-law. But then the other things started. Daniel began working later. He used to be home by 6. Then it was 7. Then 8. Then Vanessa told me, sweetly, that he had been pulled into a big project and should not be disturbed when he came home because he was exhausted. I noticed she said I a lot. I think Daniel should rest. I think we should eat earlier. I think Mom should use the downstairs bathroom from now on, since the upstairs one is closer to our room. Each sentence was polite. Each sentence was kind. Each sentence was a tiny knife, and I was too tired to see where they were all aimed. Then came the money. It started when Daniel asked me, hesitantly, whether I had talked to a financial planner. "A financial planner?" I said. "Why would I need one, sweetheart?" "Just to, make sure your savings are set up right," he said. "Vanessa's dad knows a guy. Really reputable." I looked at my son, my boy, the one who used to sit on my lap while I read him stories about dragons, and I saw, for the first time, that he was repeating words that were not his own. "Vanessa's dad knows a guy. Vanessa thinks," Vanessa says, "your father and I managed our money fine for 40 years, I told him. "I know, Mom. It's just, protection." Protection from what? I wanted to ask, but I did not. I just nodded and said I would think about it, and Daniel smiled with relief, like he had done his job, like he could go report back to her that he had tried. That night, I could not sleep. I got up and walked to the spare bedroom closet, the one with the loose floorboard James and I kept as our little secret. I lifted it and pulled out the metal box. Inside were our savings bonds, our insurance papers, and the deed to the house. The deed, my name and James's name. When he died, the house became mine, not ours, mine. I held the deed in my hands for a long time. I remembered the day we signed it. We were so young. The lawyer told us to read the fine print, and James laughed and said, "We're not going anywhere." 37 years later, I was still here, and somewhere down the hall, a woman who had lived in my house for 6 months was already planning what to do with it. I put the deed back. I smoothed the floorboard down, and I told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. The dinner was a week later. Vanessa had announced with great excitement that she wanted to cook for the family. An Italian night, she called it. She ordered food from a restaurant and reheated it in my oven, but she beamed as she served it, and everyone said how wonderful she was. Normally, I would have found that funny, maybe even endearing. But I noticed that Daniel had a folder on the table, and he kept glancing at it. My sister Carol was there because Vanessa had invited her, which I thought was strange. Vanessa had never been close to Carol. She barely talked to her at family gatherings, but there she was, sitting across from me, and there was the folder, and there was Vanessa's patient smile, and there was my son, not looking at me. "Mom, we need to talk about you." That was how she started. Not "we need to talk about the house." Not "we need to talk about the future." She said, "We need to talk about you," like I was a problem to be solved, a task on a checklist. "I know you don't like hearing this," she continued, "but Daniel's promotion means we'll need the upstairs for a nursery. We're planning to start a family, and we'll need the space. A nursery." She was going to have my grandchild, and in the same breath, she was telling me there was no room for me. "We've been thinking," she said, "that it might be best if you moved into a smaller place. Something easier to maintain. We found a lovely assisted living facility, just 20 minutes away. They have activities. Friends your age. It would be wonderful for you. Assisted living." She wanted to put me in assisted living. At 69, with a house that was paid off, with savings that James and I had built over 4 decades, with my legs that could still walk 3 miles a day. "There's even a shuttle to the mall on Tuesdays," she added brightly. Carol shifted in her chair. "The place is really nice, Margaret. I toured it. My sister had toured it. My sister had seen the facility. My sister had known about this." "For how long? You talked to her about this?" I said, looking at Carol. "We just want what's best for you," Carol said, not meeting my eyes. Daniel finally looked up. "Mom, we're not trying to hurt you. We just think, with the baby coming, it makes sense." And then Vanessa, sweet, patient, perfect Vanessa, reached across at the table and took my hand. "You are becoming a bit of a burden, Mom. It's okay to admit that. We all get older, and we all need help sometimes." The room went quiet. I looked at my hand under hers. I could feel her rings pressing into my skin, and in that moment, something in me went very, very still. It was like the ocean right before a storm. All the noise, all the years of swallowing small hurts, all the polite smiles I had given her while she took piece after piece of my life. It all went quiet. "Okay," I said. Vanessa blinked. "Okay? If that's what you think is best for the family," I said calmly. "Then okay, I'll think about it." I could feel the surprise ripple through the room. Carol looked confused. Daniel looked relieved. Vanessa looked she had won the lottery. She squeezed my hand and said, "Oh, Mom, I knew you would come around. This is going to be so good for everyone." I smiled. And I kept smiling through the rest of dinner, through the reheated pasta, through Carol's nervous small talk, through Vanessa's plans about paint colors for the nursery. I smiled when she said she could not wait to start fresh. I smiled when Daniel kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for understanding, Mom." I had never been less understanding in my life. Later that night, I sat in my bedroom with the lights off. I could hear them downstairs, laughing at something on TV. My son and the woman who wanted me gone. I thought about James. I thought about him whispering that I was the strongest woman he ever met. I walked to the closet. I lifted the loose floorboard. I took out the metal box, and this time I took out something I had almost forgotten about. A letter from a lawyer, dated 2 weeks after James died. I had never opened it. I had been too grief-stricken, too tired, and then eventually it just sat there, part of the box, part of the secret. I opened it. The letter was from Mr. Henderson, the lawyer who handled our estate. James had met with him secretly, months before he passed. He had written a codicil to his will. He had moved the house into a trust, not in my name outright, into a trust with very specific instructions. The letter explained everything: the trust, the conditions, the timeline. And right at the bottom, in James's own handwriting, a note he must have dictated to Mr. Henderson. Margaret gets the final say. Always. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the box, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up to a sound I had not heard in a long time: the mailbox. Our mailbox has a squeaky hinge, and James always said he would fix it, and he never did, and I never wanted him to. That squeak was the sound of home. I walked to the front door in my robe. Vanessa was already in the kitchen, making coffee, talking loudly on her phone about nursery wallpaper. She did not look up as I opened the door. The mail was on the mat, mostly junk. A flyer for a grocery store, a bill, and then at the bottom a heavy cream envelope with no return address. It was addressed to Vanessa, handwritten in careful old-fashioned script. No stamp, which meant someone had dropped it off. I picked it up. The envelope was thick, expensive paper. I could feel something hard inside, like a card or a document. Vanessa appeared behind me. "What's that, Mom?" "A letter," I said. "For you." I held it out. She took it, frowning at the handwriting. "Who uses envelopes anymore?" "Someone who wants to be sure you get it," I said. She tore it open right there in the doorway. I watched her face change, first confusion, then disbelief, then something I had never seen on her face before: fear. "What is it?" I asked softly. She stared at the paper in her hands. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Finally, she looked up at me, and her eyes were wide, and her voice was very small. "Mom," she whispered, "what is this?" I looked at the letter in her trembling hands. I did not know what it said. I still do not know what it said, not exactly. But I knew who had sent it. I knew the careful, old-fashioned handwriting. It was James's. "Maybe you should sit down," I said. And I smiled, and whatever Vanessa saw on my face made her take a step back. She pressed the letter against her chest like it might bite her. Coffee sloshed out of her mug and landed on the welcome mat she had insisted we buy, the one that said "Home Sweet Home" in cursive. "Mom," she said again, and her voice was thinner than I had ever heard it. "What is this?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I haven't read it. It's addressed to you, sweetheart." That made it worse. The letter was for her, and somehow I already knew enough to be standing there calm, watching her fall apart in a doorway, in a house that had never once belonged to her. "Read it," I said. "I'll make the coffee." I turned and walked into the kitchen. I could hear her behind me, the crinkle of expensive paper, then silence, the kind of silence that has weight. I filled the pot with water the way James always taught me, 1 cup for each person, plus 1 for the pot. I heard her footsteps, slow now, and then she was standing in the kitchen doorway with the letter hanging from her hand. "It's from your husband," she said. Her voice sounded hollow. "It's from your dead husband. I know. Mom, this is insane. He's been dead for 3 years. Read it to me," I said, out loud. She stared at me. I think she wanted me to break. She wanted me to cry, or to look confused, or to be as small and helpless as she needed me to be. Instead, I handed her a cup of coffee with 2 sugars, exactly the way she liked it, and waited. She started reading. The first part was from a lawyer, a Mr. Henderson, explaining that he was delivering correspondence per the written instructions of the late James Warren. The second part was a letter, James's letter, and the third part was a legal summary of something called the Warren Family Trust. I listened to her read James's words in her voice, and it was the strangest thing I have ever felt. My husband, 3 years in the ground, speaking to the woman who tried to put me away. To the woman who married my son, she read, and her voice cracked on the word woman, "I am writing this before my surgery, because the doctors tell me I might not wake up. If you are reading this, it means I did not wake up. And it means something else. It means someone tried to move my wife out of her home. The lawyer was told to send you this only on that day. So if it is in your hands, then you are the one who tried. And I want to tell you something as plainly as I can." Vanessa stopped. "Keep reading," I said. "They were his exact words?" she asked. "You want to hear this?" "I want to hear every word," I said. "He never lied to me. I'll know if he wrote it." She lowered the paper and looked at me, and for 1 second I saw something real on her face. Panic. Real, honest panic, the kind you cannot paint on. He knew, she whispered. He wrote this before I ever met Daniel, before I was born into this family. He knew someone would come for the house. I think he knew someone would come for me, I said. He didn't know your name. He didn't need to. That's what I loved about him. He planned for the worst and prayed for the best, and he never once got the order wrong. She finished reading. The letter said that the house was held in a trust, that I was the sole lifetime beneficiary, and that no sale, no mortgage, and no transfer could happen without my written consent. It said that anyone who tried to pressure me out would trigger a clause. And that clause, Vanessa read aloud in a whisper that was barely a whisper at all, would transfer the entire property to a charity James had chosen, the one that feeds elderly people who have no one. Mother's Little Helpers, I said softly. He liked that name. He used to say there's no shame in needing help. The shame is in treating people like burdens. Vanessa put the letter down on the counter. She looked at it, then at me, then at it again. Her hands were shaking. This can't be real, she said. Call Mr. Henderson, I said. His number is at the top of that page. Go on, call him. I'll wait. She called him. She put it on speaker because I think she wanted me to hear her win. But she did not win. An old, patient voice answered, and when Vanessa introduced herself as the new Mrs. Warren, there was a pause, and then Mr. Henderson said, Ah, yes. I expected your call eventually, Mrs. Warren. I have your husband's file right here, and I have your letter. James was very specific about what would happen if anyone tried to move Margaret. I'm afraid he thought of everything. He used to say a man who loves his wife should plan for the worst day of her life and then never let it arrive. Wait, Vanessa said, you can't just give her everything. We're his family too. We're his son and his daughter-in-law. Yes, Mr. Henderson said gently, and James loved his son very much. That's why he wrote Daniel a letter too. It's in the same envelope. You didn't reach the last page. The phone went quiet. There's one more letter, Vanessa said. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the paper in her hands like it had grown teeth. He wrote Daniel a letter too. I said. She read it. I don't think she wanted to, but she read it. James's letter to Daniel was short, and I memorized the words as she said them, because they were for my son and from my husband, and they were the last instructions James ever left. Daniel, my boy, if your wife is reading this to you, it means things have gone wrong, and it means I need you to be brave now. Braver than you've ever been. Your mother is not a burden. She never was. She carried you before you could walk, and she will carry you after I'm gone, and the least you can do is stand beside her when the world asks her to step aside. I love you. I always have. Now go be the man I raised you to be. Vanessa finished reading, and then she did something I had never seen her do. She sat down at my kitchen table in the chair that used to be James's, and she put her head in her hands and she cried. I let her cry. I sat across from her and drank my coffee, and I let her cry until her shoulders stopped shaking. I don't understand, she said finally into her hands. How did he know? How could he know this would happen? He was sick. He was dying. He should have been thinking about himself. He was thinking about me, I said. He always was. That was when Daniel came down the stairs. He had heard everything, I think. His face was pale, and he stood in the kitchen doorway looking at his wife, and then looking at me, and then at the letters on the table. Mom, he said, is it true? The house? It's true, I said. And you knew? You knew last night, at dinner, when she said those things about you? I found out last night, I said, after dinner. While you two were downstairs laughing at the television, I walked to my closet, and I lifted a loose floorboard, and I found a letter your father left me. He did that, you know. He always said the best secrets live right under your feet. Daniel sat down hard in the chair next to Vanessa. He looked at her, then at the letters, then at me. And I watched my son's face change. I watched guilt move in like weather. Vanessa, he said, you knew about this? You knew the house wasn't ours? I didn't know about the trust, she said quickly. How could I know about the trust? Nobody tells me anything in this family. You told me Mom should see a financial planner, Daniel said slowly, and I could hear the pieces clicking together in his head. You told me we should ask about selling the house. You told me the market was good. You told me we could buy a bigger place closer to your mother, because she was getting older and needed us nearby. Because it's true, Vanessa said. Your mother can't live alone forever. She's 69, Daniel said, and his voice cracked. She walks 3 miles a day. She painted this kitchen herself 2 years ago. She's not the one who needs help, Vanessa. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at me, and for a split second I saw it in her eyes, the calculation, the search for the winning move. And then I did something I had been planning, quietly, ever since the sofa disappeared from my living room. I stood up, walked to the kitchen drawer by the window, and pulled out my notebook. The one with the worn blue cover. The one I kept in the drawer next to the measuring cups, where nobody ever looked because nobody in that house baked. I want to show you something, I said. I set it on the table between us. I opened to the first page. March 14th, I read. Vanessa tells Daniel we should repaint the living room. Daniel says she's just excited. I say nothing. I turn the page. April 2nd. Vanessa asks Daniel to co-sign a loan for her brother. Daniel says he's thinking about it. I say nothing. Another page. May 9th. A woman calls the house line asking if we're considering selling. She says her name is from Remax. I tell her there's been a mistake. That afternoon, Vanessa asks Daniel hypothetically what he thinks the house is worth now. Vanessa was very still. I've been writing things down for 6 months, I said. Dates, conversations, names. I'm an old woman, Vanessa. I don't remember things as well as I used to, so I write them down. You've been spying on me, she whispered. I've been paying attention, I said. There's a difference. Spying is what you did when you visited 3 assisted living facilities and asked which ones pay referral fees to people who bring them new residents. The silence in my kitchen was so complete I could hear the fridge humming. How do you know that? Vanessa asked. Because the 3rd facility called the house to confirm a tour, I said. I answered the phone that day. You were in the shower. The receptionist asked if I was the daughter accompanying her mother on Thursday. I said I was the mother, and she said she was very excited to meet us both. Vanessa's face went white. That was 2 weeks ago, I said. I didn't confront you. I didn't tell Daniel. I put it in my notebook and I waited. Because I wanted to see how far you would go. And the answer, it turns out, is very far indeed. Daniel stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood up, walked to the sink, and stood there with his back to both of us for a long time. And then he turned around and his eyes were red, and he looked at his wife with something I had never seen him look at her with. Distance. Vanessa, he said, did you try to put my mother in a home so she could sell her house? Daniel, listen to me, did you? I was thinking about us, she said, about the baby, about our future. We can't start a family in a house with your mother in it. You know that. You've said it yourself, Daniel. You told me you wanted a fresh start. I never said that, Daniel said, and his voice broke. I never once said that. You implied it. I never said it, he repeated. And you know I never said it. You've been putting words in my mouth for a year, Vanessa. I've been too tired and too stupid to notice. And now my mother has a notebook full of everything you've done, and my dead father has a letter that predicted it, and I have to sit here and ask myself how long it would have taken me to see it on my own. The rest of that day was quiet. Vanessa went upstairs. Daniel went outside. He sat on the porch steps for an hour and then another hour, and when he finally came in, he didn't say where he'd been. He just hugged me, really hugged me, the way he used to when he was a boy, and I was the only person in the world who could make the bad things go away. I'm sorry, Mom, he said into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I should have said something at dinner. I should have stood up. I should have. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. I almost let her take your house, he said. She didn't take it, I said. Nobody's taking it. Your father saw to that, and I saw to the rest. Carol showed up that evening. She rang the doorbell and stood on the mat with her coat still on, and she looked at me with the face of someone who knows they've been found out. Margaret, she said, I need to tell you something. About the assisted living place. I said, I know. Vanessa took you to lunch. She told you I was struggling, that I hid it from everyone, that if I stayed in this house I would eventually hurt myself. And I'm guessing she promised you something. Money, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of being the one who was right about me. Carol's eyes filled with tears. She said you had been diagnosed. She said you didn't want anyone to know. She showed me papers, Margaret. Notarized papers. And it never once occurred to you to call me and ask, I said. Your own sister? I thought it was true, she whispered. I thought I was helping you. You were helping yourself feel important, I said. And I'm not angry about that, Carol. We're sisters. We've known each other our whole lives. I know you love me, and I know you've always felt like everyone in this family picked favorites. I'm sorry for whatever part I played in that, but I need you to understand something. You toured a building to put me in, and you never once asked me if I wanted to go. That's not something I'll forget overnight. I'm so sorry, she said. I know you are, I said, and I forgive you. But forgiveness and forgetting are different things. And right now I need some time. She left. She was crying, and I felt bad about that, but I felt worse about what she had done. I learned a long time ago that love doesn't mean you never get hurt. It means you stay anyway. But it also means you get to decide who stays with you. Vanessa came down the next morning. She looked like she hadn't slept. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her robe, and she looked at me the way she had looked at me that first day at the diner. when she cried about James, and I thought she had a good heart. "Mom," she said, "can we talk?" "Kitchen table," I said. "That's where we talk in this house." She sat down in James's chair. I sat across from her with my coffee, and I waited. "I'm not going to make excuses," she said. "I did what I did. I planned it. I told myself it was for Daniel and the baby and our future, but it was for me. It was always for me. I saw this house and I saw money, and I saw a life where I didn't have to work so hard or wait so long. And I chose that over you, over your trust, over everything. Why did you marry him?" I asked. "Because I loved him," she said, and she started to cry. "I did love him. I do love him. But I also saw the house, and I saw that he was kind, and I thought kindness meant he would never leave me. My father walked out when I was 6. He just didn't come home one day. My mother spent the rest of her life telling me that you have to take what you can before someone takes it from you. So I took your sofa, I took your pantry, I took your peace of mind, and I almost took your home." She looked up at me, and her face was raw in a way I had never seen it. "I understand if you want me gone," she said. "I understand if Daniel wants me gone. I just want you to know that James's letter was right. He said there was no third option. Be kind to her or leave. And I've been neither kind nor gone, and I don't know what that makes me." I set down my coffee. "Vanessa," I said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it. I am not your enemy. I never was. You made me one at my own dinner table, with my family watching, and it was the loneliest moment of my life. But I don't need revenge, and I don't need you to suffer. I need to know one thing, and I need the truth, not the performance." She waited. "What do you want?" I asked. "Not what your mother taught you to want. Not what you think you deserve. What do you actually want?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to be someone Daniel isn't ashamed of. I want to be someone you don't have to write in a notebook. I want to be a mother who teaches her daughter something better than what I was taught." "That's a good answer," I said. "Now here's how the next part goes. Daniel and I are going to talk tonight. He gets to decide what he wants because he's my son and he's your husband, and he's been treated like furniture in his own marriage. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told him. In this house, we fight and then we sit at the same table and eat. But we do not lie, and we do not call each other burdens, and we do not plan over each other's heads. If you can live by that, you can stay. If you can't, you can leave, and you'll leave with everything you brought and nothing you took. Either way, I'll sleep fine tonight. I've slept fine for 69 years. Your father made sure of it." I pushed my chair back. "There's cereal in the pantry, the real pantry with my mother's recipes. I moved your wellness corner into the garage this morning. You can have the garage. The pantry is mine." And that was that. Vanessa stayed. It wasn't easy. For weeks, the house was quiet, and Daniel slept in his old room, and Vanessa slept in the guest room. And I pretended not to hear them talking through the wall at night. He told her everything he should have told her years ago. She told him about her father, and about the loan she had taken out against his credit card, and about the folder of house listings she had kept in her car. He told her he needed time. She gave it to him. Progress was slow and real, and it looked less like a movie and more like two people learning to walk again. Carol and I fixed things over a long lunch at the diner on Route 9. She cried. I cried a little. We ordered the same thing James and I used to order, and we talked about our mother, and by the end of it, Carol was my sister again. Not the same as before, but close enough. And one afternoon, about a year later, I was in the garden when Daniel came out with a toolbox and stood by the mailbox. "I'm going to fix the hinge," he said. "The squeak?" I said. "Your father never fixed it in 40 years. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm fixing it." He took the hinge apart, and he oiled it, and he put it back together, and when he opened and closed the mailbox door, there was no sound at all. Just the soft click of metal. "Why now?" I asked him. "Because I finally understand what it was for," he said. "Every time that mailbox squeaked, you knew somebody was coming. You knew before they knocked. You were always ready. I used to think it was a broken hinge that Dad never got around to, but I think he left it on purpose. I think he wanted you to always hear them coming." I looked at my son, and I saw James in him so clearly that my chest hurt. "Your father was a lot of things," I said, "and he was right about most of them, but I'm not sure he planned the hinge." "If he didn't," Daniel said, "he'd be glad I fixed it anyway." That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the closet, and I lifted the loose floorboard, and I opened the metal box. All the papers were still there, the savings bonds, the deed, now sitting with the trust documents, And at the bottom of the box, beneath everything, something I had never seen before. An envelope. Cream-colored. No stamp. My name on it, in handwriting I would know anywhere. For Margaret. Read this in the spring. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, dated 3 weeks before James died, written in his careful, old-fashioned script. I read it twice, and then I sat down on the floor of the bedroom we had shared for 37 years. And I cried the way I had not let myself cry at his funeral, because at his funeral I had to be strong for Daniel. The letter said, "My Margaret, if you're reading this, the spring has come, which means you made it. I always knew you would. I know you've been carrying this house and this family on your back since I left, and I know you've done it without a single complaint, because that's who you are. I didn't write this to tell you about the trust. I wrote this to tell you something I should have said more often. You were never a burden. Not once. Not for a single day in 40 years. And if anyone ever tells you otherwise, you tell them I said they were wrong. I wish I could see the garden this spring. I wish I could sit on the porch and watch the world go by with you. But since I can't, I need you to do one more thing for me. Live, really live, not for Daniel, not for me, for you. The house is yours, the garden is yours. And whatever time you have left, it's yours too. Spend it like you own it, because you do. I love you. I always will. James." I sat on that floor for a long time, holding his letter, and I laughed through my tears, because he was always like that. Planning for the worst, praying for the best, and leaving love notes in floorboards for me to find when I needed them most. And that's where the story ends, I suppose. Not with revenge, because I never needed revenge. Not with victory, because I never saw it as a war. It ends with a house that's still mine, a son who finally learned to stand up, a daughter-in-law who is learning, slowly, what family actually means, and a mailbox that doesn't squeak anymore. I still hear them coming, though. Some habits you keep on purpose. And every spring, when the garden comes back, I reread his letter. And I think about the 2 names on one stone, and about how he always said I was the strongest woman he ever met. He was right about most things. He was right about that too.